The night winds from the narrow sea whispered through the high towers of King's Landing, singing a low lament for those lost in wars past and present. Fires still flickered across the city as rubble marked where Daenerys Targaryen's dragon had rained its furious judgment, and the once proud capital of the Seven Kingdoms wore the scars of that final conflict like a fresh tapestry of soot and sorrow. Yet life returned with its own inevitable stubbornness. Vendors re-emerged in the squares, children scuttled between debris with wide eyes and hollow bellies, and the men and women of the city tried to rebuild what they could. Cersei Lannister was dead. Daenerys Targaryen was dead. The Iron Throne itself had become a molten ruin. In this vacuum of power, a new order was rising, one that promised something more stable than the furies of war or the torment of tyrants. And it was in this changing tide that Arya Stark, once a girl flitting along the edges of death's tapestry, found herself standing in the Red Keep once more, gazing at shattered marble floors and half-collapsed corridors. Bran the Broken, her younger brother, whose claim to the throne nobody would have believed just a few moons ago, had been chosen by the surviving lords of Westeros to rule them all. There he sat on a throne fashioned anew, less a seat of conquest and more a symbol of order amid chaos. It was a seat beneath the broken roof of the throne room, with the scorching sun filtering through the skeletal remains of the high windows. The city had endured one scouring too many, and if it had become a cradle of ash and dust, then so be it. From ruin, new growth might emerge. Arya was proud that her brother sat there, though pride for her family had always warred with her sense of independence. She had not asked for a life in noble courts. In many ways, she despised them. For years, she traversed a path far darker and more winding than any child of Winterfell was ever meant to tread. She had learned to kill, to serve, to wear other faces as if they were cloaks, but above all, she'd learned to be no one. Yet she was still Arya Stark. Her eyes, sharp and gray, missed nothing of the new order that began gathering around Bran's seat. Sansa had returned to the north to become queen in her own right, ensuring the north's independence. Jon had been exiled once again to the Wall, a sentence of sorts, and though it pained her, Arya understood the necessity. Tyrion Lannister was Hand of the King, no matter how improbable that might have once seemed. The lords and ladies milled about, determining the business of the realm. It was in this half-ruined hall that Ser Brienne of Tarth stood with regal composure, appointed Lord Commander of the Kingsguard by the new king. Her name and reputation spoke for themselves. Her vow to protect had endured through countless trials. She was standing by the king's side, her posture perfect, vigilance unwavering. At her flanks, the ranks of the sworn knights seemed few, for the wars had taken a steep toll. There were empty spots in the Kingsguard, white cloaks needing new men, and perhaps new women, to fill them. Arya had never expected this. Her path beyond Westeros had seemed clear. She had told Jon she wanted to see what lay west of the Sunset Sea, chart a course into the unknown. It was a plan of escape, of discovery. She was not meant for courts and duties and idle chatter. But something in the air had changed. Maybe it was the memory of the ravaged city. Maybe it was the reminder that Sansa and Bran and Jon, all her siblings, had taken on the roles of leadership and responsibility, whereas she had always run from them. Perhaps the final push had come from Brienne's own urging. Ser Brienne had seen in Arya's skill a chance to serve. She had witnessed her in combat, the fluid grace that came from 1,000 nameless nights spent training in the dark corners of Bravos. The way a single dagger could flow from her hand as though guided by ghosts. And so, amid the swirl of courtiers and the hush of this new era, the rumor had formed like a fragile bud. Might Arya Stark take the white cloak, devoting her life to the protection of the king? It was madness on the surface. The Kingsguard was a life vow. A vow to hold no lands, father no children, marry no spouse, and commit every waking breath to the safety of the monarch. For Arya, who had once wanted the freedom of rolling seas, who had yearned to see the wonders she'd only heard whispered in taverns, it presented a paradox. But for the first time in years, it also offered something else, a purpose more tangible than wandering across the waves. If she went west and discovered nothing but endless water and the edge of the world, what then? If she hopped from port to port, would she truly be content? Or would she find her heart drifting always back to the Stark siblings who had endured so much? The question became a silent tension within her, warring with her yearning to roam free. Arya had a private audience with her brother. She knelt upon the same shattered floor that had once borne witness to the courtly intrigues of Cersei and her ilk. Bran, distant and calm, looked upon her with eyes that seemed too old for his face. He did not smile often, nor did he sorrow. He simply observed, all-knowing. In that voice too old for his years, Bran asked if she would stand as part of his Kingsguard, not because he needed to manipulate her, but because he valued her skill and, more importantly, her loyalty. Tyrion hovered near enough to hear, but far enough to grant them privacy. Arya found herself able to do nothing but listen. The words of Bran carried weight as though spoken by the old gods themselves. "You've always wanted to see beyond the horizon," Bran said softly. "And if that is your wish, you shall do it. I won't hold you. But if you stay, if you join me here, I know you'll stand true as you have since the day you came into this world." The silence that stretched between them was profound. Arya stared at the scorched floor, at the fallen columns, at the ghosts of her father's death in this very place. So many memories, so many burdens. Yet the bond she shared with Bran was of a deeper kind now. Both of them had been tempered by magic, by the ravages of war and fate. She recalled the whispers of the House of Black and White, the teachings that told her she was no one. But she was someone, she was a Stark, and perhaps that truth was important enough to guide her now. Before she could talk herself out of it, Arya nodded. "I'll join the Kingsguard," she said. The vow settled onto her heart like a quiet snowfall, gentle yet irrevocable. In that moment, she sensed the roots of Winterfell, the old gods of the north, the swirling snow of home, all converging into a single, still point of resolution within her. The die was cast. Bran's lips twitched into the faintest smile. Even Tyrion let out a surprised murmur, and Brienne, standing like a statue a few paces away, allowed her eyes to soften. The notion of a girl, a woman, joining the Kingsguard was not unprecedented since Brienne had taken that route, but it was still novel enough to stir conversation. And yet none could deny Arya's prowess nor her devotion to family. If any woman were worthy of a white cloak, it was Arya Stark, the Night King's bane. They arranged the ceremony quickly. The realm was still fragile, bandits roamed the countryside, and lords needed to be seen committing to unity. A grand or elaborate affair was impossible in the battered city. Instead, on the steps of the Red Keep's half-ruined courtyard, an audience of soldiers, small folk, and curious onlookers gathered. The sigils of the realm were assembled in that battered space, a hodgepodge of loyal knights and newly minted lords who had survived the war. In a circle around them, the blackened walls of the keep bore testimony to the damage the city had taken. There, Ser Brienne led Arya through the vows. The young Stark repeated them, her voice low and steady, eyes unwavering, feeling the pinch of each phrase. She swore to protect King Bran, to be his sword in the night, his shield in the day. She swore to hold no lands, to claim no titles, to never marry, and to live and die only for the realm and for her king. She had been a girl with a kill list once, had murdered lords and done unspeakable deeds to survive. Now she was forging a new identity yet again, shaping herself to this vow, though a faint echo in her mind asked how long she could remain so confined. When she finally slipped the white cloak across her shoulders, she felt the burden of it. The material was heavier than it seemed, weighted with tradition, with the ghosts of Jaime Lannister, of Barristan and Selmy, of Arthur Dayne. The white cloth glimmered in the sunlight, a stark contrast against the black leather of her breeches and tunic. It fluttered behind her like a hush of winter wind. The crowd had erupted into subdued cheers. There was still too much grief in the city for any real merriment, and Tyrion nodded approvingly. Ser Brienne gave Arya the simplest of smiles. In that moment, Arya realized that in stepping into the Kingsguard, she was accepting a cause not just for Bran, but for something bigger, the chance to guard the peace that had been so dearly bought with rivers of blood. The next weeks passed in a blur of training, instructions, and adjustments. Arya moved her few belongings into the White Sword Tower, a tall, slender building that had once housed the greatest knights in the realm. Much of it was scorched and the top floors were unstable, but one of the middle floors remained intact enough to live in. She felt the strangeness of it immediately. No one asked her to do anything menial. Here, her chores were replaced by duty rosters and watch schedules. She patrolled the corridors of the Red Keep, watched the city gates, and stood behind the king's throne during royal audiences. The city's stairs followed her everywhere. Some recognized the wolf girl who had once been lost, presumed dead. Others only saw a small, wiry young woman wearing the white cloak. She had to learn how to be an official protector, not just a killer in the shadows. Lethal stealth was her forte, but a Kingsguard knight had to be seen, had to present a symbol to the people that the king was secure. In these days, she became closer to Brienne, who recognized the complexities of Arya's situation. During training sessions in the courtyard, they sparred with wooden swords. Arya was smaller, faster, her style fluid and unpredictable. Brienne was strong, a fortress in plate armor, her blows striking with punishing force. Their matches often drew onlookers. Some cheered for Brienne's unwavering power, others marveled at Arya's dancing footwork, her ability to slip around an opponent's guard. More than once, the practice swords landed bruising hits on each other's shoulders or ribs, and the watchers would gasp as the two women tested each other's mettle. Through it all, the mutual respect grew. Arya appreciated Brienne's honest guidance, her protective instincts, her unwavering commitment to honor, a code that had guided her through countless betrayals. In return, Brienne saw in Arya an unyielding spirit, the same dogged relentlessness she herself had wielded against the scorn of men who laughed at the idea of a woman knight. Between these days of swordplay and sentinel duty, Arya found odd moments of reflection leaning against a broken parapet overlooking the sea. She wondered if she'd made the right choice. The memory of her plan to sail west lingered like the tang of salt in the air. Now, on that same horizon, she watched gulls circle, imagining unknown lands that might lie on the other side. She recalled conversations with the Hound, with her father, with Jaqen Hagar. Each ghost reminded her of a different face she'd worn at different moments in her life. She felt the ache of wanting to slip out of the city, to vanish into the night, as she had done so many times before. But each time that longing rose, she forced herself to remember the vow she'd sworn, the vow that held her in place. She had chosen this. The act of honoring it was a new kind of freedom, or so she tried to believe. King Bran's rule began to take form. Tyrion Lannister oversaw the workings of governance with a deft hand. As the city rebuilt, courtiers came and went. Some had lost entire families to war. Some clung to old grudges or tried to gain favor in the new regime. Whispers of rebellion or dissatisfaction circulated, though quietly. Arya's sense of hearing had grown keen, and she heard talk of certain nobles who resented that a boy king, a cripple at that, sat on the throne. There were mutterings that Sansa, the Northern Queen, would overshadow her brother eventually. Others spoke of how Daenerys's surviving supporters were scattered, some forming pockets of resistance in the countryside, unable to accept their queen's death. Then there were tidings from the Iron Islands, where Yara Greyjoy maintained a cautious loyalty, and from Dorne, where new leadership was forging alliances. The realm was in flux. Peace was a tender thing, easily shattered. And so the Kingsguard under Ser Brienne planned for the worst. Arya was part of that planning, though she often felt a mild sense of alienation. She wasn't used to discussing strategies in open halls or standing in the back corner of the King's Council chambers, listening while her brother and his advisors debated. She was used to secrecy, to searching out a single target and letting the point of needle or the sharp side of her dagger solve the problem. But the new king wanted to avoid bloodshed if he could. He spoke of forging alliances, of persuading lords to follow him not by fear but by unity. He used what he knew, memories, visions, fragments of the realm's history to guide his decisions. For Arya, it was a strange dance to watch. Once she had pinned her hopes on vengeance alone. Now her brother was the ultimate mediator, seeking to bring peace. Yet trouble brewed despite all good intentions. A rumor emerged that a former Targaryen loyalist, some minor lord once enthralled by Daenerys, had organized a rebellion in the Stormlands. Pockets of men, disgruntled and bereft, turned bandit and roamed the highways. Reports trickled in of burned villages and murdered loyalists. Tyrion insisted that the threat be investigated, and so a royal retinue was formed to travel to the Stormlands and quell the rumor, if indeed it was only rumor, or deal with it if it proved true. King Bran, physically fragile though he was, insisted on traveling. He could see more from the back of a cart than some might from a castle tower. His warging abilities and visions offered advantages. The entire Kingsguard was to accompany him, including Arya. In the early dawn, they departed King's Landing. Bran rode in a specially outfitted carriage that allowed him some comfort and advantage. Brienne led the column, her armor polished but practical, a white cloak rippling behind her. Arya rode beside her on a sturdy mare, clothed in leathers and the white cloak that still felt somewhat new across her shoulders. They were joined by a handful of city watchmen and other knights, forming a modest escort. The plan was to travel discreetly, so as not to invite unnecessary trouble. Nevertheless, the weight of the king's presence was undeniable. Villages along the Rose Road turned out to see the passing of the royal carriage. Children gaped at Arya's slight figure on horseback. She felt their eyes follow her, a mixture of awe and curiosity. The journey made Arya realize how deeply war had scarred the lands. Forests had been ravaged by battle or dragon fire, fields trampled under armies. Some villages were half empty, their young men lost in wars for kings and queens who were now dead. Everywhere she looked, she found signs of how fragile life had become, and in many ways, how urgent it was to protect the peace they had finally earned. She was determined to do her part. If that meant wearing the white cloak and standing at Bran's side, so be it. At nights, they made camp in open fields or in the courtyards of minor holdfasts, where local lords hosted them nervously. The nights brought memories for Arya. One evening, while the others huddled around a modest cookfire, Brienne asked Arya about her journeys beyond the sea, about her training in Bravos. Arya's answers were guarded. She mentioned the kindly old man, the house of black and white, her battles with the waif, but not in detail. She did not mention the price she paid, the faces she wore, or the final act of slaying the Night King. She preferred to keep those details locked away. Still, there was an odd comfort in sharing fragments of her story with someone else, even if that person could never fully understand. On the 10th day of travel, they entered the Stormlands. Rain battered the retinue, and the roads turned to muck. A swirling gale tossed the trees, thunder rumbling overhead. The Stormlands were as moody as ever, the storms here known to break the spirits of unprepared travelers. Arya kept an eye on Bran's carriage, but the king seemed more curious than perturbed. Perhaps in his visions he had seen worse. The group pressed on, determined to reach a stronghold rumored to be the epicenter of the rebellion. Late in the afternoon, as lightning forked across a black sky, their scouts returned with news. A gang of armed men was spotted harassing villagers not far off the main road. Bran insisted they investigate at once. With Brienne commanding the guard, they turned from the muddy track and rode out to a clearing near a small hamlet. What they found there reeked of cruelty. Farmers forced to kneel in the rain, bruised and bleeding, while a group of heavily armed men demanded tribute in the name of Daenerys Targaryen. They carried a blackened banner that bore the faint outline of a dragon. Brienne called for them to stand down in the name of King Bran, but the rebels only jeered. They accused the new king of being a usurper who sat upon a throne of broken oaths. Arya felt a tightness coil in her chest. She had once admired Daenerys for freeing the slaves across the narrow sea, but those days were gone, tarnished by the violence that ended her reign. Now, these misguided men carried a grudge that threatened innocent lives. The standoff was brief. In a swirl of a moment, the rebels charged, forcing Brienne's knights to engage. Steel clashed with steel as the storm roared overhead. Arya dismounted with a fluid grace, drawing needle, the sword that had returned to her side after so many years. She moved through the fray like a dancer, her cloak plastered to her body by rain, her boots squelching in the mud. Her first opponent lunged with a battered longsword. She sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him into the open, then thrust Needle home. He collapsed in the muck, clutching his wound. Another came at her from behind, but Arya felt the presence, spun and parried. Their blades rang, thunder adding its own percussion. She ducked under a wild swing, sliced at the man's legs, and felt the jolt as her steel found flesh. It was not the first time she'd taken a life, nor would it be the last. But each kill reminded her that she was still that girl from the Trident's Edge, from the halls of Harrenhal, from the dark corners of Bravos. Her vow as a Kingsguard might define her outwardly, but her skill with a blade came from darker experiences no vow would wash away. Brienne led the knights in a fierce but measured push. As soon as the rebels realized they were outmatched, they tried to flee. A small group tried to break away toward the hamlet, possibly seeking hostages or cover among the frightened villagers. Arya saw them bolt and sprinted after them, ignoring the rivulets of rain streaming down her face. Mud clung to her boots, threatened to pull her down, but she pressed on, spurred by that primal sense of duty. She would not let them hurt these people. She caught up to the slowest rebel first, ramming into him with her shoulder. He tumbled into the mud with a curse, and Arya dispatched him with ruthless efficiency before whirling toward the others. One tried to raise a crossbow. She darted forward, slashing his wrist. He cried out and stumbled, allowing her to thrust Needle into his chest. The third man got away into the trees, disappearing in a swirl of rain, but the villagers were safe. The skirmish ended quickly. Most of the rebels lay dead or dying, a testament to the folly of open defiance. A few survivors were dragged before King Bran's carriage, shackled and shivering. Bran gazed at them with calm detachment, water dripping from the edges of his canopy. The men spat curses, defiance in their eyes. Tyrion studied them, his expression grave, and then turned to Bran. A decision had to be made: execute or imprison. The king spoke quietly, stating that they would be taken to Storm's End to stand trial, and if found guilty, they would be sentenced accordingly. A fair trial, not a beheading on a muddy field. Even now, Arya could sense that her brother wanted to break the cycle of violence. Some among the small folk watched with wary relief, uncertain if justice would truly be served. That night, they made camp at the outskirts of the hamlet, offering what little aid they could to the bruised farmers. Arya stood watch in the dark, leaning against an ancient oak as the storm slackened. Her cloak hung heavy on her shoulders, and despite the day's violence, she felt a strange sense of pride in having protected the innocent without crossing lines of needless cruelty. This was new. She had spent so many years fueling herself on personal revenge. Now, she fought for people she did not know, and she gave them a chance at some measure of peace. That sense of purpose felt different. Perhaps this was the meaning behind the white cloak, fighting for something beyond oneself. In the days that followed, they pressed deeper into the Stormlands, searching for the rumored central band of the rebellion. The terrain was rugged, a mixture of windswept coasts and dense forests. At each castle or holdfast, Bran's retinue found the same reaction: fear, distrust, or desperate hope that the king's presence would restore order. The swirl of rumors became clearer. There was indeed a small faction of lords who, embittered by the devastation and angered by how Daenerys had died, believed they could rally support by claiming a Targaryen child had survived. Yet no such child existed, at least not that anyone could confirm. It was a false claim to rile up the discontented, a ghost banner to unify the lost. Finally, they arrived at a remote stronghold perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. The battered towers bore scorch marks that might have come from dragonfire. The lord there, a man named Gilbert Wilde, was rumored to be at the center of these seditious whispers. Bran, Brienne, Tyrion, and a few others approached under a banner of peace, hoping to learn the truth without shedding more blood. Arya insisted on accompanying them into the audience hall. The interior was damp and dark, dripping with the perpetual moisture that the Stormlands carried. Torches flickered along stone walls. A dais held a weathered throne, and upon it sat Gilbert Wilde, a man of middle years with a face shaped by both cunning and desperation. He feigned courtesy. "Your Grace," he greeted Bran, though the tightness in his voice betrayed his true feelings. He gave Tyrion a cursory nod, and barely acknowledged Brienne except to scowl. Then his gaze slid to Arya. She stood behind Bran's chair, silent, her hand resting lightly on the pommel of needle, her white cloak catching the low torchlight. His lips twitched into a sneer. Clearly, the notion of a woman in the Kingsguard displeased him. Or perhaps it was the fact that this woman was Arya Stark, sister to the king. Tyrion did the talking, polite yet sharp, inquiring about rumors that Wilde harbored men who claimed loyalty to Daenerys Targaryen. Wilde shrugged and gave half answers, claiming ignorance, blaming bandits for the unrest. The tension in the hall grew, a coil waiting to spring. Bran watched with that uncanny calm, but Arya felt a prickle at the back of her neck. Danger. As the conversation continued, she scanned the shadows, noticing the armed men lining the walls, each wearing the crest of House Wilde. They were too numerous, too well positioned. If this turned into a trap, their small group would be outnumbered, no matter how skilled they were. She felt her heart rate pick up, adrenaline creeping into her limbs. When Tyrion pressed the point, Wilde finally stood, raising his hand to silence them. He claimed that his land was loyal, that any talk of rebellion was slander by neighboring lords. He said if the king had come here seeking traitors, he would find none. Yet his eyes glittered with a malice that belied his words. Before any of them could respond, the chamber doors slammed open, and armed men flooded in. A snare. Brienne's blade was out in a heartbeat. Arya moved in front of Bran's chair with lightning speed, needle unsheathed. Tyrion cursed under his breath. Wilde bellowed for them to yield, that the rightful heir to the throne would soon reclaim these lands, and that he would not bend to a cripple king. The insult rang out. For a moment, Bran's face remained impassive, but Arya's anger ignited. The brawl erupted. Wilde's men charged, swords and spears flashing. The king's immediate guard fought back, but they were sorely outnumbered. Arya leapt into the fray, her training as faceless and as a Stark blending into a lethal dance. She darted low, hamstringing one foe, then spun to slash another across the neck. Blood spattered the stone floor. Brienne hacked down a third attacker, her white cloak a banner of defiance as her sword and shield clashed with a half-dozen men. Tyrion ducked behind a pillar, trying to avoid the melee, though Arya heard him cursing as he jabbed at a man with a dagger. The king remained in his chair eerily still, though his eyes took on a faraway look. Arya knew that expression. He was slipping into visions, or perhaps warging into ravens or wolves outside. The fight became chaos. Sparks flew where steel collided. Shouts and the ring of metal filled the hall. Arya found herself facing 3 men at once, and she had to call upon every ounce of skill to fend them off. She ducked a blow aimed at her head, sidestepped a thrust at her belly, and managed to strike back with needle, skewering one man through the ribs. Another tried to tackle her, but she jumped aside and caught him in the throat. Breathing heavily, she turned and saw Brienne locked in combat with multiple foes. One of them landed a strike on Brienne's pauldron, denting it. She staggered but kept fighting. Across the room, others in the Kingsguard were also embroiled in vicious skirmishes. Wilde himself emerged from behind the dais. He wielded a warhammer that gleamed with savage promise. He aimed it at Bran, evidently intent on striking the king down. 2 of Wilde's men reached Bran's chair, but Arya threw herself into their path. She parried a scimitar with needle and reversed the angle in a single fluid motion, opening the man's belly. He sank to his knees, entrails spilling. The second man tried to swing an axe at her side, but Arya twisted, letting the heavy blade pass, then slammed her elbow into his face. He reeled, blood bursting from his nose. Before he could recover, she finished him. Wilde roared, bringing the warhammer overhead, ready to crush Bran where he sat. In a heartbeat, Arya leapt between them, raising needle. The warhammer came down with bone-shattering force. She stepped to the side, letting the hammer ring off the stone of the throne's base. She slashed at Wilde's arm, forcing him to drop the hammer. He howled. She pressed the advantage, driving him back. This was not a man who possessed the skill of a lifetime of swordsmanship. He was strong, desperate, but unrefined. Arya's quicksilver movements overwhelmed him. She kicked the hammer out of his reach and pressed needle to his throat. He spat at her, flecks of saliva hitting her cheek. "You think you can stop the Targaryen cause?" he rasped. "A bastard cripple is not my king." Arya's blood pulsed with fury. Memories of all the enemies she had faced flickered through her mind. In another life, she might have simply cut his throat, but she recalled the vow she had taken. She was not just Arya Stark, the girl with a kill list. She was sworn to protect the king, to uphold justice. Yet she also knew that men like this, cunning traitors who used lies to stir up war, would never relent if given a chance. What was justice now? The choice balanced on a knife's edge. She could end him here, or she could drag him to face a trial. Then Bran's voice, soft yet resonant, spoke from behind her. "Let him face judgment. We are not executioners this day." Arya drew a breath. Her arms trembled with battle lust. Slowly, she removed Needle's point from Wilde's throat. Brienne appeared at her side, battered but unbroken, blood streaking her armor. The rest of Wilde's men had been subdued or killed. The hall was a mess of wounded knights, fallen bodies, and overturned furniture. Outside, rain whipped the windows with renewed fury, as though the storm raged against the betrayal and violence within. When the final blow had been struck and Wilde's men either surrendered or lay dead, the survivors were rounded up. The Kingsguard disarmed them, bound their hands. Arya watched Wilde glare in silence, hatred etched in every line of his face. Perhaps he would prefer to die in that moment rather than face the humiliation of defeat. But the new king's justice would be served another way. Bran gave orders to have Wilde transported to King's Landing to await trial, along with the rest of the traitors who might still be alive. That night, the stronghold was secured. Tyrion took command of the household staff, sending messages to loyal lords in the region to maintain order. While the loyal knights patrolled the corridors, Arya knelt beside a small hearth in a side chamber, warming her hands. Blood stained her clothes, though most of it was not her own. The white cloak was torn at the edge, a reminder of how close the battle had been. Her body ached from bruises and exhaustion, but she felt an odd sense of satisfaction, a grim acceptance that she had done her duty. She looked at the flickering flames and thought of Gendry for a moment, how he had been legitimized as Baratheon, how once he might have taken a place in these stormlands. That possibility was gone, another path not taken. Bran entered, wheeled into the chamber by one of the guards. His face was as inscrutable as always, but Arya could sense the concern beneath the surface. He thanked her for her protection, for her loyalty. She shrugged, uncomfortable with praise, but the gratitude in his eyes was genuine. He spoke softly then, saying that the realm still needed strong defenders, people willing to stop men like Wild from leading others astray. Arya nodded. In that quiet, she felt a strange wave of relief. She had made the right decision, it seemed. She was saving lives. They journeyed back to King's Landing in somber triumph, prisoners in tow. By the time they arrived, new scaffolds had been erected in the city squares, though for once, they were not for mass executions. King Bran saw to it that the men were tried. Some were executed for treason, others were sent to the wall or made to toil in rebuilding the city. The message was clear. If you threatened the fragile peace, you would face justice. Yet it was a justice tempered with mercy, something Westeros had lacked under previous reigns. Over the months that followed, Arya settled into her new role more fully. She accompanied Bran when he traveled to broker alliances. She guarded him during audiences with lords and ladies, many of whom eyed her with curiosity or concealed contempt. Some men of the old guard still bristled at the notion of a woman knight. She trained daily with Brienne, refining a style that balanced her speed and cunning against the unwavering fortress of Brienne's own technique. They became something akin to friends, though Arya often found that friendship in the Red Keep was a dangerous, complicated matter. Trust was a currency spent carefully. She remained wary, always mindful that even now, in peacetime, old habits of subterfuge and cunning died hard in the corridors of power. Sometimes, late at night, she wandered the less traveled paths of the castle, the lonely walkways and old watchtowers. She recalled how she had once chased cats in these same halls, how she had hidden in the shadows, hearing secrets that changed her life. She often ended these midnight walks standing at a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The moonlight would play upon the dark waters, and she'd imagine a ship bearing west, past the horizon. Even though she had chosen differently, a part of her still yearned for that unknown. The vow she had taken was not one she could lightly forsake now, even if her wanderlust tugged at her heart. She tried to content herself with the knowledge that she was preserving the future for the people of Westeros. Perhaps that was enough. In the following year, King Bran's realm began to stabilize. Sansa held the north in secure stewardship, forging a prosperous region that traded goods southward with increasing vigor. The Riverlands slowly mended their war-torn fields, aided by the crown's support. The Vale remained loyal. The Reach, under new leadership, supplied grain to the capital. Casterly Rock, though diminished, was governed by Kevan Lannister's lineage, cooperating with Tyrion. Dorne, ever proud, maintained its distance but made no open moves of aggression. Even the Iron Islands found a tenuous peace, as Yara's leadership balanced independence with respect for the new king. But peacetime did not mean Arya's life was free of challenges. New threats emerged like weeds in a garden, small, insidious, but dangerous if left unchecked. Smugglers, minor lords plotting to elevate themselves, rumors of dragon cults that venerated Daenerys as a martyr. Sometimes Arya longed for the simplicity of a single target, a name on her list, an alleyway ambush. Serving Bran meant fighting in the open under the scrutiny of the realm, and that came with its own complexities. She had to learn to navigate the web of alliances, to read the subtle cues of those who might become enemies. She had to stand at banquets in the Red Keep, wearing the formal attire of the Kingsguard, listening to the prattle of noblewomen who eyed her with fascination or envy while men questioned whether she was truly a knight. The constant swirl of backhanded compliments and sly barbs tested her patience. At times, she would catch herself wishing for a simpler life or no life at all but that of a nameless wanderer. Yet she persevered. The vow anchored her, for better or worse. One incident, months after the Stormlands rebellion, threatened to unravel that precarious peace. A group of assassins attempted to infiltrate the Red Keep during a feast meant to celebrate a new trade agreement with the Iron Bank of Bravos. The timing seemed deliberate, a statement, perhaps, that foreign gold and the new king were unwelcome. Arya discovered the plot when she overheard two men whispering in an alcove near the banquet hall. She caught the hiss of steel being drawn, the murmured mention of the crippled king, and the promise of a large reward if they succeeded. Without hesitation, she shadowed them, her training in stealth returning like an old friend. They moved carefully, weaving through servants' corridors, unaware that a silent wraith trailed them. Arya eventually confronted them in a narrow hallway. They were clad in dark leathers, faces masked, armed with daggers. The moment they realized they were discovered, they attacked. The hall was cramped. Arya parried the first dagger, elbowed the second man's jaw, then shoved him back against the wall. The masked killers were skilled, clearly no common thugs. They struck in tandem, forcing Arya to move fast to avoid being cornered. She pivoted, letting the flash of a blade pass by her ribs, then countered with a slash of her own. One assassin fell, clutching a wound in his side. The other hissed at her, lunging forward, but a well-placed thrust with needles sent him to the floor, choking on his own blood. She pulled back their masks, finding no one she recognized, just grim faces twisted by pain. Later, it was revealed they were hired swords, sellswords from the disputed lands, with no direct ties to any lord that could be easily traced. Yet the attempt spoke volumes. There were still those who saw Bran's reign as vulnerable or who believed they could sow chaos for profit. Word spread of Arya's bravery in stopping the assassins. King Bran, in a rare public show of emotion, thanked her personally before the entire court, commending her for her loyalty and skill. A subdued applause followed, but Arya found no pleasure in the attention. She did not fight to earn applause or laurels. She had protected her brother, her king, and that was enough. Still, she noticed the flicker of grudging respect in some eyes around the throne room. Even those who once doubted the capabilities of the slender girl from the north began to accept that Arya Stark, the Wolf of Winterfell, was indeed a force to be reckoned with. Yet with every success, Arya wrestled with her own doubts. She walked the corridors at night or lingered in the yard after training and wondered if her soul would ever truly find peace. She had seen too much, done too much. The House of Black and White had taught her that she was no one, but now she was someone vital to the realm's stability. The tension sometimes kept her awake, her mind spinning with the ghosts of her past. Maybe that was why she forged an unlikely friendship with Podrick Payne, who served as a knight under Brienne's command. Podrick's good-natured optimism and awkward sincerity offered a contrast to Arya's internal shadows. He looked up to her, spoke to her without guile, and she found some measure of solace in that innocence. Seasons rolled on. The sun-baked King's Landing in the summer months, driving people to seek shade in the labyrinth of streets. Trade blossomed and reconstruction in the city began to take on an impressive scale. New buildings rose where old had crumbled, and though the memory of Dragonfire still haunted the older generation, a new generation of children would grow up knowing King Bran's calm rule. Arya continued her duties, traveled with the king when required, and at times was sent by Brienne on discreet missions to quell lawlessness or to deliver messages to far-flung corners of the realm. She rode across the plains, visited the ghostly ruins of Harrenhal, passed through the Twins, and even returned briefly to Winterfell, where she paid her respects to the godwood with its solemn heart tree. Sansa greeted her with warmth, though Arya sensed the weight of queenship on her sister's shoulders. They sparred briefly in the courtyard at Winterfell, as they had done in days long past. Though the cold northern wind stung her cheeks, Arya felt a pang of longing to remain. But she had her vow, and winter or summer, her duty lay to the king in the south. So she rode away once more. Over the course of these travels, her name grew in renown. Small folk spoke of T. He Wolfguard of the king, the slender knight with the northern face and eyes that had seen death. Rumors mingled with legends. Some said she was a faceless spirit, others claimed she could turn into a dire wolf. Children tried to imitate her fluid movements with wooden sticks. It felt strange, almost surreal, that she was now part of such tales. Once she had been a nameless fugitive. Now she had become a symbol, however unintended. The turning point came in the second year of Bran's reign, when rumors of an Ironborn uprising reached the court. Yara Greyjoy was away from the Iron Islands, overseeing negotiations in the north, and in her absence, a faction of her own people had seized Pike, declaring it independent from the crown. Suddenly, the tenuous alliance with the Greyjoys was threatened. Tyrion advised caution, not wanting to provoke a prolonged conflict, but Yara insisted on swift retaliation. Bran agreed that the Iron Islands must be shown that rebellion would not be tolerated. A royal delegation would sail to the Iron Islands, and once again the Kingsguard would accompany him. For Arya, the idea of setting sail revived memories of her original plan to journey west. Yet this time she would be sailing for duty, not freedom. The king's small fleet set out from the harbor of King's Landing under favorable winds. The sea stretched before them, glittering in the midday sun, the smell of salt thick in the air. Arya took a moment on deck to close her eyes and breathe it in. She could almost imagine a horizon that went on forever, guiding her toward lands no one had ever seen. But as soon as that thought rose, she set it aside. This journey was not about exploration, it was about preserving the realm. The voyage was tense. Storms threatened, and the Iron Islands themselves were notoriously brutal in their waters. When they finally reached Pike, the fortress loomed on its jagged rocks, defiant and bleak. A small army of Ironborn stood at the shore, led by a self-appointed captain who rejected both Yara's leadership and the king's rule. Negotiations were attempted, but it quickly became evident that these Ironborn had no interest in bending the knee. They believed in the old way, in taking what they could by might. Yara, furious, demanded they relent. They refused. Thus a siege began. It was a harsh, swift campaign on those stony shores. The king stayed aboard one of the vessels offshore, while Yara led loyal Ironborn in an assault. Arya and the Kingsguard boarded rowboats to land on the rocky beach, forging a path through defenders who hurled axes and spears. The fighting was vicious, amplified by the crash of waves and the roar of wind. Ironborn warriors, known for their ferocity at sea, fought like cornered animals on the rocky cliffs. Arya found herself drenched in spray from both ocean and blood as she cut down a succession of attackers. The white of her cloak was soon soaked through, its edges tattered from the salt air and the slash of blades. Slowly but surely, Yara's forces and the Kingsguard overwhelmed the rebels. They pressed up the winding stone steps that led to the fortress, capturing the outer walls. Resistance remained fierce, but by nightfall, most of the rebels had been driven into the main keep. Yara negotiated a momentary truce, offering them a chance to surrender. The next morning, the rebel leader emerged, haggard and beaten. He spat at Yara's feet and declared he would never serve a king who was chained to his chair. Yara backhanded him with a fury that sent him sprawling. Arya stood by, silent and watchful, as the remainder of the Ironborn rebels flung down their weapons. Some had thirsted for plunder and independence, but the king's show of force, combined with Yara's iron grip, ended the rebellion swiftly. When it was over, the keep stank of salt, seaweed, and blood. Prisoners were chained, and Yara took charge of them. Bran was brought ashore in his wheeled chair, carefully carried by a few men over the uneven stones, so he could hold a short audience and confirm Yara's continued rule. Arya stood guard at his side, ignoring the sour looks from the captured Ironborn. She could feel their hatred for the mainlanders, for the notion of subservience. But if there was any chance for a lasting peace, it had to be enforced. The next day, storms lashed Pike, forcing the king's retinue to remain longer than planned. Arya explored the rocky corridors of the fortress. The sea crashed below, echoing through the halls. At one point, she stood by a narrow window, gazing out at the tumultuous waters. This was the sea she had once yearned to cross, on her own journey to nowhere. A pang of wistfulness struck her. She felt the old pull, the promise of mystery beyond the horizon. But she looked down at her white cloak and recalled the vow she had taken. She had made her choice. When the weather calmed, they set sail back to King's Landing. Another rebellion quelled. Another victory for Bran's reign. By the time they returned to the capital, the realm was abuzz with talk of how the king had effortlessly reasserted control. Some said it was all thanks to King Bran's foresight. Others whispered that it was thanks to the wolf in white, Arya Stark, who allowed no harm to come to her king. Arya ignored the rumors. She was tired, her bones ached, and a deep exhaustion settled in her spirit. How many rebellions would she have to put down? How many challenges to Bran's authority would arise? Had she tied herself to a never-ending cycle of violence, albeit in the name of peace? One evening, after their return, Bran called Arya to a private meeting in the king's solar. The room was warm, lit by a roaring fire. A simple wooden table stood in the center, scattered with maps and parchment. Bran sat in his chair, gazing into the flames as though reading secrets only he could see. When Arya entered, he turned those ancient eyes upon her and thanked her once more for her service. But then he surprised her by asking if she was truly happy. Arya hesitated. She rarely pondered happiness in a direct sense. She had known anger, fear, satisfaction in vengeance, and fleeting moments of joy. But happiness? She wasn't sure. She tried to explain that she wanted to honor her vow to serve the family, the realm. Bran watched her with an unreadable expression, then said he remembered the day she had spoken of sailing west, how free she had sounded when she described it. He said he did not want her to feel as though she'd caged herself in the Kingsguard when her spirit longed for exploration. Confusion churned inside Arya. She had believed her vow was absolute, that she would remain in the Kingsguard for life. That had been her choice, and she meant to keep her word. But Bran spoke of a new precedent. He reasoned that knighthood and service should not be a prison. The old vows of the Kingsguard, written in a time of rigid tradition, might be due for reconsideration under his rule. He was not an ordinary king, and this was not an ordinary realm anymore. Change was happening everywhere. If she wished, she could remain in his service for a time, and then, once he had established a secure foundation for the realm, he would release her from her vow. He did not say it lightly, but in that gentle, dispassionate voice. Arya felt her throat tighten, a swirl of emotions she did not know how to name. She had chosen her path out of loyalty, out of love for her siblings. But the sea still called her. The open horizon beyond Westeros beckoned her in dreams, and the memory of the House of Black and White reminded her of her capacity for reinvention. She knelt before Bran, uncertain of what to say, her heart pulled in two directions, the vow she had lived by and the yearning for what lay beyond the edges of the map. King Bran placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice kind yet firm. "I see many things, Arya," he said. "Your place will always be at my side if you wish it, but I cannot hold you here if your heart is elsewhere. Not anymore." A hush fell in that cozy solar, the fire crackling as if to punctuate his words. Arya closed her eyes for a moment. She recalled the hush of the Godwood in Winterfell, the swirl of wind over the narrow seas, the countless faces of the dead she had worn, the ghostly echo of her father's voice. She remembered the vow she spoke in the courtyard of the Red Keep and how it had guided her to save lives and uphold honor. She had learned so much in her time as a Kingsguard knight, forging bonds of respect and loyalty she never imagined. And yet she had also felt the walls closing in at times, the relentless demands of royal life. At length she rose, meeting Bran's gaze. A decision began to form in her mind, a resolution that brought both fear and exhilaration. She would continue to serve for now. Finish whatever needed to be done to ensure the realm's safety. Help Brienne and Bran quell any remaining threats. But when the realm was truly at peace, when Sansa's north thrived, and Tyrion's administration stabilized the crown, she would accept Bran's offer to sail west. Not immediately, not recklessly, but eventually. The thought kindled a lightness in her chest. She did not betray her vow by longing for the open sea. She merely looked to the horizon. Bran understood. He nodded, as though he had known her answer all along. A faint smile graced his lips, and he told her that she would always be welcome in his court, whether she chose to stay until the end of her days or depart for the unknown. This was the new world they were shaping, a world that need not be bound by the old rules, even though it carried the old scars. Arya left that chamber feeling as though she walked on a tightrope between destiny and desire. She still held the white cloak, still bore the duty of the Kingsguard, but now there was a door left open in the fortress walls. In the months that followed, she redoubled her efforts to stabilize the realm, to stand vigil over her brother. She went on missions, quashed minor plots, protected ambassadors, and escorted supplies. She and Brienne trained young recruits, men and women both, forging a new generation of knights who believed in something greater than themselves. During these tasks, her face was set in cool determination, but at night, she dreamed of wide, unexplored oceans. In time, after several years of service, when the realm had found a measure of lasting calm, a calm unimaginable in the days of the Mad Queen and the War of the Five Kings, Arya found herself at last free to contemplate her next step. Sansa was firmly established in the north, beloved by her people. Jon was beyond the wall, forging his own path among the free folk. The rest of Westeros had accepted King Bran's rule, if not always with enthusiasm, at least with the understanding that prosperity was at hand. Tyrion oversaw the daily governance with weary but efficient skill. Brienne remained Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Podrick had grown into a fine knight in his own right. The time had come. One morning, as the sun rose orange over Blackwater Bay, Arya walked through the courtyard of the Red Keep and found Brienne. The tall knight was adjusting her armor after a sparring session. Arya approached and stated she intended to leave soon. She mentioned that Bran had given her leave, but that part of her still felt like she was abandoning her duty. Brienne, wise and compassionate, told Arya that duty and desire need not always be at odds, that she had served long and well, and that the king trusted her to make her own choices now. They embraced briefly, a wordless moment of respect and affection. Then Arya turned to go, white cloak fluttering behind her. She intended to speak with Bran, to confirm the day of her departure. She would board a ship outfitted for exploration, a small, swift vessel that would test the waters beyond the known world. It was a journey she had dreamed of since she was that restless child in Winterfell. As she crossed the courtyard, she paused beside the broken remains of the throne room windows, gazing at the city that lay beyond. King's Landing was no longer a heap of rubble. New spires reached for the sky, banners of the United Realm fluttered in the breeze, and the hustle of daily life filled the streets. She had guarded this rebirth, helped secure it against threats within and without. She remembered her vow in that battered courtyard so long ago. She had sworn a lifetime of service, and perhaps in some way she would always serve the people of Westeros, even if her feet carried her to distant shores. The vow was in her blood, in the ideals and lessons she had learned from her father and from all her travels. That vow could not be undone by distance or time. Yet now she would face the unknown. She would breathe the salt air without the weight of duty pressing upon her every moment, though she carried the memory of that duty in her heart. She had become a protector, a knight, and in doing so, she had found a piece of herself she never realized she needed, the capacity for honor beyond personal vengeance. But her road stretched on, and the horizon beckoned. The girl who had once whispered the names of her enemies before sleep had learned the power of forging a new name for herself, a guardian, a knight, a wolf set free. So it was that Arya Stark, member of the Kingsguard, Wolf of the North, lingered in the courtyard for a final moment, letting the sunlight wash over her face. She inhaled deeply, smelling the warm stone and the faint tang of the sea. In her mind's eye, she saw the gates of Winterfell, the snows of the north, the swirling braziers and bravos, the dark hall of the House of Black and White, the shifting faces of her past. She felt them merge into one, the tapestry of her life that had led her here. Soon, she would say her goodbyes to Bran, to Brienne, to all she had come to respect, and then set sail. She did not know what lay beyond the edge of the map, but she knew she was done being only a killer in the shadows or a guard in white. The world was vast, and she was Arya Stark, always a Stark, no matter the faces she wore. When at last she moved on, each step felt light, as though she walked with both the surety of her vow upheld and the excitement of new possibilities. The cloak draped over her shoulders might soon be folded away, but the lessons it had taught her, the sense of honor and the protection of those who could not protect themselves, would remain. The King's Guard, the Wolf's Guard, these titles would forever be part of her story, just as she would forever be linked to the realm she helped save. And yet, she would seek new stories, new wonders, new seas. In the end, that was the true gift of joining the Kingsguard instead of leaving Westeros right away. She had learned who she was, had found a balance between her past and her future. Now, as the gulls cried over the bay, she allowed herself a small smile at the thought of undiscovered countries and unseen stars. The winds of change had carried her from a girl lost in the war-torn roads of Westeros to a sworn shield of the king, to a woman with a choice, a vision, and a place in history's unfolding. If a tide of regret sometimes lapped at the edges of her consciousness, she knew it was part of being human. The open sea awaited, calling to her with the promise of the next great unknown. And behind her, the city stood safe, the king secure upon a throne built not from swords, but from unity and hope. No longer bound by illusions of vengeance or the constraints of old traditions, Arya Stark walked forward, her heart beating with the rhythm of distant waves. Whatever the future held, she would face it as she always had, with courage, cunning, and a quiet, resolute grace. She had been many things, a child of Winterfell, a servant of the many-faced god, a faceless assassin, a white-cloaked knight. Now, she was simply herself, free to choose her path, free to protect those she loved, free to explore the edges of the world and beyond. And that was enough. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of the Red Keep, illuminating the courtyard's ancient stones in pale gold. Arya stood at the edge of a dry fountain that had once spilled water in the shape of dancing mermaids, her gaze following a pair of sparrows that flitted overhead. Today was the day she had chosen to speak to King Bran once more, to confirm the moment of her departure, to make good on the quiet understanding they had forged in that private solar. The realm was at peace, finally, blessedly, and in the gentle hush that came after so many storms, her heart beat with a new urgency. Part of her ached to sail west. Another part still clung to the solemn pride of the white cloak on her back. Even now, after all her travels, after all the battles and midnight vigils, Arya still carried that unbreakable tether to Winterfell, to her brother, to the idea that duty could be a calling rather than a cage. Yet in that courtyard, she sensed the next chapter unfolding. She took her time crossing the yard. The hush of dawn hung over King's Landing, broken only by distant hammering and the murmur of servants beginning their day's work. A faint breeze stirred the edges of her cloak, the white fabric lovingly mended and laundered, though it bore stains and tears from a dozen skirmishes. Each mark told part of the story of her service. Passing a stack of newly arrived barrels, she nodded at a pair of stable hands who paused to bow. They whispered, "Milady Knight," with a hint of awe. Arya still found it odd to hear herself addressed that way, but she offered a brief, polite smile. If it reassured the small folk to see their king's protector at ease, then so be it. A movement near the training yard drew her attention. Ser Podrick Payne was drilling a trio of younger recruits. They lunged and parried in the crisp air, wooden swords thwacking as they tried to replicate the stances he demonstrated. Podrick had come far from the shy squire who once stumbled after Tyrion Lannister's every order. He had blossomed into a capable knight, earnest and diligent, much admired by his trainees. He spotted Arya and waved, a wide grin on his face. She raised a hand in return, letting her eyes roam over the scene. Brienne must have already gone inside to take her breakfast or prepare for the day's duties. Arya resolved to talk to her before noon. They had parted just last night after dinner with mutual understanding that Arya's decision to leave soon was final, yet the thought of farewell still sat like a knot in Arya's chest. She made her way to the royal quarters, which were nestled in a part of the castle still bearing faint scorch marks from the dragon fire that had ravaged King's Landing under Daenerys's final assault. The damage had been largely repaired, stone blocks replaced, and windows re-leaded, yet one could still see the blackened edges in certain corners as though the keep itself refused to let anyone forget the cost of war. Two of the king's personal guards, men in white cloaks that gleamed in the sun, recognized Arya at once and stepped aside to let her pass. Her presence here was as natural as that of Brienne or Podrick. She had long since earned her place among them. Inside, Tyrion Lannister stood by the corridor, looking over a scroll with a deeply furrowed brow. He wore a simple doublet of dark gray, his hair tinged with a bit more silver than it had been when Arya first saw him after the war. He glanced up and greeted her with a nod. "My lady," he said, then smirked slightly. "Or should I say, my sworn sister-in-arms?" Arya gave a wry twist of her mouth. "I've never been one for titles." "True enough," Tyrion replied, rolling the scroll. "You look ready for something. Headed to see his grace, I.A." "Some. Yes." She eyed the parchment in his hand. "What's troubling you?" "Rising tensions in Pentos," he sighed, waving the scroll. "The Magisters are worried about ships from Volantis pushing into the Bay of Pentos. They want King Bran to—" He paused, then shook his head. "Long story. The short of it is, we may have to consider more trade negotiations or at least show of naval strength. But that's a problem for the small council." A small silence followed. Arya studied him carefully, recalling the day he had been chosen as Bran's hand, how unexpected yet fitting it seemed. Despite the burdens of rule etched into his posture, Tyrion had weathered them well. He looked tired but resolute, a man who had lived through cataclysms and found a measure of purpose on the other side. Arya spoke quietly. "If trouble stirs in Essos, will it mean war for us?" Tyrion shook his head. "Not necessarily. We prefer to keep well clear of another war. The realm needs peace, and so far, King Bran has guided us toward it. The last thing we want is foreign entanglements, especially so soon after all that bloodshed." His gaze flicked toward her. "Which reminds me, you've served ably for years, and rumor says you may be leaving. I assume that rumor is true." She nodded, feeling the same tug of conflicting emotions. "I plan to speak with Bran today. The realm is stable. Sansa holds the north, Yara keeps the Iron Islands in line, well, mostly. There's peace, or at least something close to it." Tyrion's eyes glimmered with sympathy. "You've earned your reprieve, if you want to call it that. Some people never leave the Kingsguard until they're too old to walk. But this new age is shaped by new choices, yes? Bran seems eager to let good people find their own paths." He placed a hand on Arya's shoulder, an uncharacteristic gesture of camaraderie. Whatever you do, remember you've done more for the crown than most men who wore the white cloak for decades. She didn't quite know how to respond. Tyrion had a way of disarming her with honesty, even if she suspected he often had deeper motives. But his words carried warmth she couldn't deny, and she allowed herself a small nod of thanks. Without further ado, he stepped aside to let her pass. She moved beyond him into the chamber that served as Bran's audience room. King Bran sat near an open window that looked out toward Blackwater Bay. The throne room itself had been shattered and rebuilt in simpler lines, but this smaller chamber offered him a place to hold private or semi-private counsel. His chair, carved from dark weirwood and padded with cushions, was designed to support his legs comfortably. A few ravens perched along a ledge outside, peering in with bright, uncanny eyes. Bran often used their sight, though he seldom spoke of it openly. When Arya entered, he turned, his own gaze distant yet focused. "Arya," he said quietly. "Come in." She did, letting the doors close behind her. King Bran's new Lord Commander, Brienne, stood off to the side, arms folded. She offered Arya a nod that was equal parts respect and affection. Her hair was bound at the back of her neck in a tight queue, and she wore polished plate and mail that caught the morning light. Arya knew this was the moment they had all expected. No flowery speeches, no grand ceremonies, just a final understanding among those who trusted one another. Bran studied her with those strangely ancient eyes. "We've been waiting for you." Arya inhaled slowly, glancing at Brienne, then back at Bran. "I made my decision. I'll be leaving soon. I've served the realm to the best of my ability, and it's been an honor to do so." She hesitated, grappling with the words. "But my heart tells me it's time. You offered me this choice, Bran, and I think I must accept it." The king nodded, as though her departure was something he had glimpsed years ago in one of his visions. "I understand." He paused, letting the soft hush of the morning settle in the room. "You have protected me and countless others from threats that might have destroyed us all. Without you and Brienne and the rest of my guard, I doubt peace would have lasted this long. Your vow was made in a world still reeling from war. Now that world is mending." She watched him carefully, noting how the sunlight caught the silken threads of his robe, woven in midnight blue and embroidered with subtle patterns of ravens and leaves. Once, when they were children in Winterfell, they had shared a sibling rivalry that was no more than a game of pretend swords and climbing walls. Now he was king, possessed of powers and knowledge beyond mortal ken, and she was a knight in white. The distance between them felt both immense and heartbreakingly trivial. Bran inclined his head. "In the name of the crown, in the name of your king, I release you from your vow, Arya Stark. You may keep the cloak as a token of your service or leave it behind if you wish. The realm will always remember you as one of its protectors." Her throat constricted. She had expected formality, but hearing the words still caused her heart to clench. A swirl of images flitted through her mind, kneeling in a battered courtyard to take the oath, riding by Bran's side through storms and rebellions, intercepting assassins in the hidden corridors, saving villagers in the Stormlands, forging something close to friendship with Brienne. And, of course, the deeper recollections of her father's execution, her lonely flight from King's Landing, the faces of her lost family. She bowed her head in acknowledgement of the king's decree. "Thank you, Bran. I will never forget what we built here." Brienne cleared her throat, stepping forward. "We have an official record for the White Book if you wish to add your final words." She hesitated, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Only if you want it. It is customary for members of the Kingsguard." Arya remembered that massive tome kept in the White Sword Tower where the deeds of every knight who served the crown were recorded. Their triumphs, their failures, the shape of their lives etched in black ink on pale pages. Once, Jaime Lannister had lamented how his own page was incomplete. Brienne had written the truth of his deeds after his death. Now, Arya felt a stab of uncertainty. Did she want her name preserved there, when so much of her life had been lived in the shadows? Yet she realized that part of what she had done deserved to be known. The realm was changed, and maybe her story belonged to it as well. With a soft exhale, she nodded. "Yes, I'll add my words." Brienne gestured for her to follow, and Arya did so, pausing only to nod goodbye to Bran. He offered her a gentle, parting smile, the kind that carried a world of unspoken gratitude. Then he turned his chair to gaze out the window once more, lost in thoughts or visions no one else could fully share. Brienne and Arya left the solar, descending the familiar corridors that led toward the White Sword Tower. Sunlight slanted across the ancient stone floor, warming it after a long night. Guards wearing the crown stag, the golden rose, the sun spear, and other sigils of the realm passed them by, each paying the customary respect to the Lord Commander and the departing knight. Arya felt an odd mixture of lightness and sorrow. She had never been one for big farewells or weepy ceremonies, but the finality of this moment pressed on her. It reminded her of leaving Winterfell behind as a child, of stepping onto the ship that took her to Bravos, of departing the Hound's side. Every time she had to confront the truth that life's path was seldom a circle but a line pushing ever onward. At the tower entrance, 2 young knights stood guard. They wore the white cloaks of the Kingsguard, freshly tailored. One was barely more than a boy, with a downy face and anxious eyes. He stared at Arya with open admiration. The other, a seasoned warrior with a scar across his cheek, offered a respectful salute. They opened the door, and Brienne led her up the winding staircase into the chamber where the White Book was kept. Sunlight poured through narrow windows, illuminating the tall stand that held the enormous tome. The covers were bound in pale leather, the pages thick as parchment. Brienne moved to the stand, opening the volume gently, turning past pages of nights long gone. Arya glimpsed bits of text describing Ser Barristan Selmy, Ser Jaime Lannister, and others whose stories wove in and out of the realm's tragedies and glories. Finally, Brienne reached the blank space that was reserved for Arya. A quill and inkwell waited beside it. "Go on," Brienne said softly, stepping back to give Arya some privacy. Arya stood there, her hand resting on the page's edge. Countless memories flickered through her mind, from her days as a small girl at Winterfell to the lethal training in the House of Black and White, from the terrible nights on the King's Road to the day she joined the Kingsguard. She had come so far, changed so many times. Could she even capture that on a page? Eventually, she dipped the quill into the ink and began. In a neat, firm hand, she wrote, "Arya of House Stark, daughter of Eddard Stark, served as sworn knight of the Kingsguard under the reign of King Bran the Broken. She protected the king in times of rebellion and strife, defended the innocent in the Stormlands, and helped maintain the peace against various plots and assassins. She served with honor and skill, forging a path for other women who would follow in the Kingsguard. She remained loyal to her family and upheld her vow until King Bran released her from it in recognition of her years of service." A hush settled over her as she wrote. She wondered if she should include anything of her time as No One, the faceless assassin, or mention her role in slaying the Night King, but that story was known by some, and by others it was whispered legend. She left it out, uncertain if it belonged in a book of knights. Instead, she concluded with a single line, "She leaves now to seek what lies beyond the western seas, carrying the spirit of the North in her heart." When she finished, she set down the quill. The black ink glistened in the morning light, each letter a testament to the improbable journey that had led her here. She felt strangely at peace with the words. They were incomplete, of course, her entire life could not fit in a few paragraphs. But they were enough to mark her place in history. Brienne stepped forward, reading the words in silence. Then she placed a hand on Arya's shoulder. "Well done." Her voice had a tremor in it. "It's an honor to have fought beside you." They left the chamber together, descending the twisting staircase. At the base, the young knights stepped aside once more, and Arya paused, looking at the sunlight that spilled through the open door. She saw the city spread out before her, the rooftops and winding streets, the ships in the bay. For the first time in years, she felt no compulsion to patrol or keep watch. Instead, she felt only the call of the horizon. Brienne cleared her throat, her voice soft. "What now?" Arya turned to her. "I'll gather what I need, mostly just needle and a few personal items. I've arranged a ship if the master of the port is to be believed. She's called the Sunset Maiden, a small brig outfitted for exploration. Hardly more than a rumor a few months ago, but I found her captain drinking in the taverns by the Mud Gate. He's adventurous, or at least foolish enough to attempt the journey with me." She gave a half-smile. Brienne's solemn features lightened slightly. "Are you certain you want to go alone?" "It's how I do things," Arya replied gently. Then, seeing a flicker of worry, she reached out and grasped Brienne's hand in a rare gesture of open affection. "I'll be all right. And if I'm not, well, I'll handle it." Brienne squeezed her hand back. "You've always managed to handle the unimaginable. Just remember you'll always have a place here, among the Kingsguard, and in my own hall if ever you need refuge." "I know." Arya's throat tightened again, and she withdrew her hand, stepping into the courtyard. "Thank you, Ser Brienne. You've taught me more than you realize." With that, she left. She could feel Brienne's gaze linger on her back until the bright sunlight swallowed her silhouette. The city waited outside, wide and busy and teeming with a new day. She had a few hours yet before midday to see who she needed to see, to collect her small trunk of belongings, to slip away without fuss. It was how she preferred things. She crossed the yard at a brisk pace, heading toward her small chamber in one of the Red Keep's lesser towers. Unlike the White Sword Tower, this tower was old and rarely used by the highest lords, but she had found it comfortable in its quiet gloom. A far cry from the stables or the flea-bottom hovels she had known as a girl on the run, but still not so ostentatious as the royal apartments. Within those stone walls, she had a modest bed, a table, and a chest containing a few spare clothes, plus a handful of mementos. On her way, she spotted Podrick Payne again, now finished with his recruits. He approached breathlessly, wiping sweat from his brow. "My lady Arya," he stumbled over the right address. "I heard you're leaving." She nodded. Podrick's boyish earnestness tugged at her. "Yes. My time is done. Bran released me from my vow." His face fell a little. We'll miss you. It's strange how quickly you became part of us even though you were always a Stark. The men talk of you the way some talk of legendary knights." Arya almost laughed, but she sensed the sincerity behind his words. "I'm no legend. Just a girl who learned a few tricks." He smiled shyly. "Still, thank you. You taught me some of those tricks, remember? You helped me with my footwork, told me not to stand in place like a statue. I'll keep teaching that to the new recruits." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you'll do just fine. Take care, Podrick. You've grown into a knight that any Lord Commander would be proud to have at their side." His cheeks colored slightly, and he bowed his head. She left him there, the morning sun glinting off his mail, and slipped into the tower that held her room. A few winding staircases, a narrow corridor, and she was at her door. The battered oak creaked when she pushed it open, revealing the small, circular chamber. Dust motes floated in the shafts of sunlight. The walls were thick stone, the single window looking out over Blackwater Bay. She remembered many nights perched on that sill, staring at the sea, letting her mind drift westward until she could almost taste the salt of distant shores. She knelt beside the chest. Inside lay the clothes she'd carried from Winterfell, a thick cloak lined with wolf fur, the leather Sansa had once insisted she'd take for traveling in the north, a few tunics, spare breeches. Alongside them lay a small wooden box containing her most treasured items. She lifted the lid. A coil of black string, a scrap of cloth from her dire wolf Nymeria's old bedding, and a wolf's tooth that she'd found long ago near the Winterfell crypts. Gently, she placed them aside. She wouldn't need them on her voyage, but she didn't want to leave them behind in the Red Keep. Perhaps she would ask someone to return them to Winterfell for her, let them rest in her family's ancestral home. At last, she ran her fingers over Needle. The sword looked as sharp and deadly as the day Jon had given it to her, though it bore scuffs and marks from many battles. This blade had been her constant companion, from King's Landing to Harrenhal, from Bravos to the halls of the Red Keep once more. She held it up, seeing her reflection in the steel. She was still slender, still looked younger than her years at times, but her eyes carried the weight of everything she had witnessed. Would she bring Needle west? Or might it be a burden? In the end, she knew the answer. Needle was as much a part of her story as her own skin. She sheathed it and set it aside, intending to wear it at her hip until she set foot on the ship. A knock on the open door startled her from her thoughts. She looked up. Gendry Baratheon stood there, tall and broad-shouldered in simple traveling leathers. He had shaved his beard closer to his chin, and his hair was tied back. The last time Arya had truly spoken with him, they had stood in a swirl of complex emotions. He had once proposed to her after the war, but she had refused, not wanting to become a lady of Storm's End. Time and duty had pulled them apart, though there was still respect and maybe a trace of old affection between them. Now he lingered in the threshold, uncertain. "I heard you were leaving," Gendry said softly. She rose to her feet. "Word travels fast." He stepped inside, his gaze flicking around the small room. "I came to King's Landing on business with the Master of Ships. I have to negotiate some repairs to the ports in the Stormlands. I only arrived last night, and the guards told me your vow was ended." Arya nodded, exhaling. "Bran gave me the choice." Gendry studied her, lips pressed together. "So you're going west, aren't you? Even though you once said you planned to do that years ago, after the war. You stayed for a while." She looked down at her hands. "I needed to. The realm needed me. My family needed me." His voice was gentle. "And now they don't?" She searched for the right words. "The realm is in good hands. Sansa is queen in the north, Bran is on the throne, and we have peace, fragile, yes, but real. My staying here won't change that, not anymore. But I have to see what's out there. I've always had a restless soul. You know that." He smiled ruefully. I do. Don't let me try to chain you down with any talk of Storm's End." That was a younger man's foolish hope. Arya felt a pang of regret. It wasn't foolish, but it just wasn't for me. They stood in silence. Through the window, a brisk wind rattled the shutters. She could almost hear the call of the gulls. Eventually, Gendry moved closer, resting a large, calloused hand on her arm. I'm glad I got here in time to see you off. The lords in the Stormlands all speak of you with respect. You know that, right? Even the ones who used to sneer at the notion of a woman in the Kingsguard. They're forced to admit you saved us from more than one rebellion. She shrugged. They can sneer at me all they like. It doesn't matter. He hesitated, then looked at her sword. Needle. You'll take it with you, I see. It's never leaving my side. A small grin ghosted his face. I once tried to reforge a blade for you after we parted ways. But I never finished it. Too many responsibilities. Too many damned lords wanting me to run around Storm's End. Maybe one day, if you come back, I'll show it to you. Arya felt her throat tighten again. Maybe I will come back. If I can. She found herself reaching for his hand without thinking, holding it for a moment. His skin was rough with the old calluses of blacksmithing. She squeezed gently, then let go. Take care of yourself, Gendry. Storm's End needs a leader who won't let the storms blow it away. He managed a short laugh. They'll have to pry me out of the gates if they want me gone. You stay safe too, wherever you end up. The sea can be cruel. She nodded. I'll remember that. Gendry lingered another moment, then turned and left the chamber as quietly as he had arrived. Arya stared after him, feeling a swirl of relief and sadness. It felt good to have that final exchange to lay to rest old tensions. She wondered if their paths would ever cross again in this life. The world was vast, and in that vastness, chance and coup. Encounters happened less often than songs like to claim. But something told her that if the gods willed it, she and Gendry might meet again in some distant port, or maybe on a day when she returned old and gray, if she ever returned at all. She resumed packing, tucking her clothes and personal effects into a small bag. No sense hauling a trunk over the seas, especially not on a small vessel. She buckled Needle at her hip. The white cloak, her symbol of the Kingsguard, she folded neatly on her bed. She paused over it, the bright fabric stirring old memories. She would keep it but not wear it anymore. At length, she set it inside her chest and closed the lid. Maybe she would leave it here, maybe she would ask Brienne to hold it. She hadn't decided. For now, she let it rest, a tangible sign of who she had been. The hour was almost at midday when she finished. She slung the bag over her shoulder, took a last look at the chamber that had been her home these past few years, and strode out the door. This time, she knew she would not return. A short walk took her to the outer courtyard. There, she found Brienne waiting by a column. The tall knight wore her armor, gleaming in the sun, and had a horse ready for Arya, a chestnut mare with gentle eyes. I thought you might prefer to ride down to the port rather than walk, Brienne said, handing her the reins. Arya mounted, feeling the old familiarity of a saddle. Brienne climbed onto her own steed. Together, they exited the Red Keep, passing guards who saluted with solemn respect. The city streets unfurled before them like a tapestry, vendors hawked their wares, children chased each other around puddles, and the clang of metal rang from distant forges. King's Landing looked healthier now than it had in years, its once ruined districts largely rebuilt, its people somewhat happier. Arya remembered the city before the wars, though her memories were those of a young girl who bristled at being forced into a life of southern refinements. They made their way to the port. Soldiers recognized them, parting the crowd so they could pass unhindered. At the docks, the smell of brine and fish mingled with rotting seaweed and fresh tar. Masts creaked, ropes groaned, and sailors called out in a dozen accents. The small vessel called the Sunset Maiden lay moored near the far end of the dock, overshadowed by larger merchant cogs and galleys, but its sleek lines hinted at speed and agility. A lean man with a bushy beard stood at the gangplank, arguing with a harbor master. He wore a worn tricorn hat and had a series of tattoos snaking up his forearms. Arya recognized him as Captain Morin, the man who had promised he would sail her to the ends of the earth if she supplied enough coin and enough nerve. Arya dismounted, handing the reins of her horse to a stable boy who came forward. She turned to Brienne. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stood there, listening to the harbor's din. Finally, Brienne cleared her throat. When I first saw you, I never imagined we'd stand like this, side by side, each of us a knight in truth. The realm has changed, and so have we. Arya felt a sudden surge of affection for this woman who had saved her sister, who had proven that a woman's honor and skill could surpass a kingdom's prejudices. Thank you for everything. Brienne nodded, her features set but her eyes glinting with emotion. If you ever find yourself in trouble and you return here, know that I'll stand with you again. That vow, at least, I won't relinquish. A faint smile touched Arya's lips. Likewise. The two clasped forearms, a warrior's handshake that said all the words they did not speak aloud. Then Brienne released her, guiding her horse away. Arya watched her go, the tall figure riding back through the throng, the white cloak rippling behind her. In another life, Arya might have served indefinitely under Brienne's command, forging a legacy of women knights in the Red Keep. But that wasn't her path. Turning, she approached the Sunset Maiden. The harbormaster was vigorously pointing at a ledger while Captain Morin waved an arm in exasperation. Arya stepped up behind them. "Is there a problem?" Both men whirled around. The harbormaster blinked at her, noticing the sword at her hip and the confidence set of her posture. Captain Morin tipped his hat. "My lady, we're just having a minor disagreement about docking fees." The harbormaster sniffed. "This brig of his is barely fit for open seas, and the crown demands certain fees for any vessel leaving with the stated intention of never returning. It's not standard, you see, but we can't be losing potential taxes." He's refusing to pay the difference. Arya arched an eyebrow. "I'll cover it." "How much?" The man named a figure that made Morin splutter. Arya quietly reached into her belt pouch and drew out several gold coins stamped with the dire wolf sigil and the imprint of King Bran's face, fresh currency minted after the old coinage had begun to dwindle. She handed them over without protest. The harbormaster gawked at the amount, but Arya's calm stare left him with no argument. He stammered his thanks and hurried off, leaving Morin to scratch his beard. "That was generous, my lady," Morin said, sounding both relieved and uneasy. "I didn't expect you to pay so much." Arya shrugged. "What use is gold where I'm going?" He studied her for a moment, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're a strange one, and I've hauled cargo for men who claim to be alchemists and pyromancers. But if you're as determined as you say, then let's hope the Sunset Maiden can take you farther than anyone's gone before." She inclined her head. "I'm ready. Where's my berth?" He gestured for her to follow him up the gangplank. The deck was cramped, the hull narrow, rigged with a single tall mast and a smaller secondary mast at the stern. Canvas sails lay furled, and a crew of perhaps 10 men and women bustled about, stowing provisions and checking lines. Their faces were a patchwork of different backgrounds. One woman with olive skin from the free cities, another man with the look of a summer islander, a third with pale eyes reminiscent of the far north, though he wore an earring in one ear. They glanced at Arya with curiosity, but none spoke up. Captain Morin led her to a small cabin in the aft, barely more than a closet with a bunk. "It's yours. Might be tight, but the sea is a harsh mistress. Best get used to it." Arya stepped inside, dropping her bag onto the bunk. The cabin smelled of salt and pine tar. A single porthole looked out at the bustling harbor. She could hear gulls squawking, their cries weaving through the murmur of the city. It was cramped indeed, but she didn't mind. She'd slept in barns and hedges, in the bowels of Braavosi temples, on cold hard ground beneath the open sky. This was practically luxurious by comparison. When she returned to the deck, Morin was barking orders for the crew to prepare to cast off. The tide would be favorable until late afternoon, and they wanted to slip away from the harbor quietly. Overhead, the sails were unfurled, catching the breeze that carried the smell of freedom. Arya took a moment to stand by the railing, scanning the wharves. She spotted Brienne on her horse at a distance, turning back toward the city gates, and possibly a few onlookers from the Red Keep's ramparts. None of them waved or called out. The hush of farewell was more poignant than any fanfare could be. Soon, the lines were thrown off, the sails caught the wind, and the Sunset Maiden drifted from the dock. A hush spread among the crew as the city receded behind them, replaced by the open waters of Blackwater Bay. Arya felt a flutter in her stomach. She had boarded ships before, but never quite like this, with no set plan to return. Yet her heart beat with a sense of possibility. She touched Needle's hilt, drawing courage from its familiar shape. They skirted the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, passing other vessels inbound with cargoes of grain and cloth. Sailors called out to each other, exchanging jests or curses, but soon the brig angled westward, leaving the main lanes behind. A few hours later, King's Landing was but a smudge on the horizon. The tall towers of the Red Keep merging with the haze of the coastline. By dusk, even that was gone. Captain Morin, satisfied that everything was in order, approached Arya by the stern. "We'll follow the coast south a bit, then veer west once we pass the mouth of the Whispering Sound near the Reach. It might be safer to hug the shore a little while longer, in case we need supplies or repairs." I'm not sure if your intention is to sail straight off the map. Arya nodded, the wind ruffling her hair. We sail until there's no land to cling to. After that, we keep going. That's how I see it. He let out a soft chuckle. You're not the first to say that, but maybe you'll be the first to succeed. He cast a glance at her sword, still belted at her side. I hear you were a knight. Odd for a woman, not that I'm complaining. But is that steel going to help us if we meet a sea storm or a kraken? She studied the rolling waves. The sunlight was turning the water to liquid gold. It helps me, and that's enough. With a nod, Morin excused himself to see to the rigging. Arya lingered, looking out at the horizon. She recalled the stories old Nan used to tell of the sunset sea that no one who sailed far west returned to tell the tale. She imagined the swirling edge of the world, waterfalls plunging into the void, or monstrous creatures lurking beyond the knowledge of men. She felt a chill, not of fear, but of excitement. She had defied death before, faced the armies of the Night King. Whatever lay beyond, she would face it in her own way. The days that followed settled into an odd rhythm. The Sunset Maiden crept along the southern coast, passing Tarth Brienne's homeland, though they did not stop. They skirted the edges of Shipbreaker Bay, where storms lashed them for 2 full days, leaving the crew haggard and frayed. Arya refused to cower below decks, instead helping to secure lines and tie down supplies. She had no formal training as a sailor, but she learned quickly, her agility proving invaluable when sails threatened to rip loose. Once the gale subsided, the brig resumed its westward course, crossing the Sea of Dorne's calmer waters. They made a brief stop at Old Town to replenish food and water. Arya stayed aboard, preferring not to draw attention, though she watched from the railing as the city's great lighthouse burned brightly in the distance. She'd heard Samwell Tarly was there once, studying at the Citadel, but she wasn't sure where he was now. The crew quickly gathered what they needed, and by sunrise they were gone again. Morin seemed eager to escape the heavier port taxes of the high towers. Finally, the brig left the coastline behind, turning southwest until even the low outlines of the arbor disappeared. The waters grew deeper, the wind stronger. Captain Morin conferred with his charts in the cramped cabin that served as a makeshift navigation room. No one had accurate maps of the far western sea. Most ships that sailed too far never returned, or returned half-wrecked with delirious sailors who told tales of impossible storms. Morin's plan was to chart a course by following the patterns of currents gleaned from ancient records and rumor, then head due west once they found a calm corridor. Arya listened to his talk of tides and star readings, picking up what she could. But her main job was simply to be part of the crew, helping where needed and staying out of the way when not. She had no illusions that her presence altered the sea's mercies, and her skill with the sword would do little if the ocean decided to claim them. Still, there was a kind of peace in the monotony of days at sea. Arya rose at dawn with the rest of the crew, performed her tasks, coiling rope, checking the lashings for barrels, scraping the deck if needed, ate a simple meal of salted fish or hard bread, then took the occasional shift on watch. She practiced her sword work in the morning light, ignoring the curious stares of the sailors who sometimes stopped to marvel. She offered to teach them a move or two, but most declined, joking that they'd rather make friends with the sea than with her blade. By the time the sun sank, she often found herself leaning over the railing, staring west as the stars emerged one by one. In those quiet hours, she remembered her family. Jon, exiled beyond the wall, forging a life of his own among free folk. Sansa, proud and steady in Winterfell, ensuring the North's prosperity. Bran, perched on a throne he never wanted but bore with calm wisdom. She wondered if they sensed her travels. Bran might, with his strange powers. But perhaps it mattered little so long as each sibling found their peace. The memory of her father's final words, the faces of her mother and Robb, even the fleeting presence of Rickon, these ghostly echoes accompanied her at night, neither heavy nor light, simply there. She had avenged them in her own way, found closure, but the scars remained. Maybe out here, on waters no one had claimed, she could lay those ghosts to a gentler rest. Weeks stretched into more weeks. The Sunset Maiden lost sight of any known land, and the crew grew restless. The captain studied the sky each night, charting the stars. The water changed shades, sometimes a deep navy, sometimes a turquoise so clear they saw schools of fish shimmering beneath the surface. At times, the horizon seemed infinite, a constant reminder that they had sailed past the edges of the usual maps. Morale dipped occasionally, and Arya heard whispers among the crew that they might be lost. Captain Morin insisted they were following the currents, that this far out, the world's shape played tricks with a mariner's mind. But there were days when even he paced the deck with a worried frown. One evening, a sailor named Tala, a woman from Lys, approached Arya while she was coiling rope near the prow. Tala looked uneasy. Some are saying we should turn back if we don't find land soon. Supplies won't last forever. Arya paused, glancing at the sun dipping below the waves. Would you prefer to sail home with no new discoveries? Didn't you sign on for something like this? Tala shrugged, eyes scanning the endless waters. I did, but I also didn't think we'd be afloat forever with no sign of anything but gulls and fish. You've faced the impossible before, so people wonder what you think. Arya rested a hand on the rail, feeling the gentle sway. I think fear is natural. This isn't the kind of journey most people take. But if you believe in going where no one else dares, you have to trust that the risk is worth it. The woman nodded slowly, though her face remained troubled. I just hope the captain knows how to find fresh water or land. If not, the sea might claim us all. Arya understood the concern. She gave what reassurance she could, but inwardly she felt that creeping doubt. Was this a fool's errand? Would she lead these people to a watery grave simply because she longed to know what lay beyond the horizon? At night, as the ship rocked her to sleep in its cramped cabin, she dreamed of vast waters and silent coastlines, of ghostly shapes that slid beneath the surface. She told herself that if there was any place to discover, they would find it. If not, they would face the unknown with courage. One dawn, as she stood watch with a young deckhand named Dren, she spotted a swirl of foam on the horizon. The rising sun illuminated something large and dark cresting through the water. For a heartbeat, she thought of whales. She had heard tales of them near the Shivering Sea. But this shape was sleeker, its fin cutting through the waves. Then several more appeared, circling around each other, as if drawn by the Sunset Maiden's presence. Dren gasped in alarm. The shapes were enormous, at least 3 times the length of a man. Their dorsal fins cut arcs through the waves, and now and then, one of the creatures leapt partially from the water, showing a gleaming flank that shimmered with scars and barnacles. Arya felt her blood quicken. She had never seen anything like them, though they reminded her of the whales that sometimes patrolled the summer sea. These were apex predators, perhaps some monstrous species of fish or mammal. Yet they did not attack. Instead, they seemed to follow the brig as though curious. For the better part of an hour, the creatures swam alongside, sometimes diving deep, sometimes surfacing with a whoosh of spouting water. The sailors watched transfixed. Captain Morin came out to observe, stroking his beard. I've heard rumors of such beasts in the far seas, he muttered. They rarely approach ships. Perhaps they've never seen one before, not out here. Arya leaned over the railing, meeting the gaze of a single creature that surfaced close enough for her to see its dark, intelligent eye. A strange wonder gripped her. Beyond the known edges of the map, life abounded in ways Westeros had never imagined. She raised a hand in a wordless gesture as if greeting it. The beast hovered for a moment, then disappeared beneath the surface in a flurry of foam. When it reappeared, it gave a noise like a groan, echoing across the waves. Then, as swiftly as they had come, the creatures vanished into the depths, leaving behind only the memory of their presence. The ship pressed on. The atmosphere aboard improved slightly after that encounter. The crew took it as a sign that they were truly charting unknown waters, that wonders might yet appear. And indeed, days later, they spotted a scattering of rocky islets rising from the sea. Morin ordered the brig closer. The islets were jagged, crowned with a few twisted trees that resembled no species Arya had seen. When they anchored off one of the larger rocks and sent a rowboat ashore, they found fresh water trickling from a natural spring. A small miracle. The crew filled their barrels eagerly, marveling at the crispness of the water. Arya ventured inland, though inland was merely a few hundred paces from one shore to the other, discovering a colony of bright red crabs that scuttled across the rocks. She couldn't help but smile. This place was unnamed, unclaimed, a mere speck in the ocean. Yet for them it was an oasis. They spent a day replenishing supplies, gathering driftwood to repair small damages to the hull. At night, Arya climbed the highest point of the islet, where the wind whipped her hair about. She stared into the western sky. The sun had set in a blaze of orange, leaving a deep purple band on the horizon. Stars emerged, countless and sharp, unpolluted by city fires. She felt the immensity of the world press down on her in that moment. Yet she also felt a calm acceptance. The old anger, the old thirst for vengeance, they were relics. She was here now, forging her own path, as free as the wind. Perhaps that was all she had ever wanted. To be unbound by the labels of lords and ladies, to explore life's edges on her own terms. They left the islets behind the next day, naming them simply Crab's Haven among themselves. The sea turned choppy. the wind shifting to the west and forcing them to tack repeatedly. Captain Morin looked worried. Northerly winds would have served them better, but it seemed fate had other plans. The brig angled southward for several days, looping around storms that threatened from the horizon. At times, they used the trick of trailing a sea anchor or adjusting sails to avoid being drawn into the worst of the squalls. Twice, they had to bail water as thunderous waves crashed over the bow. But the ship held, and the crew persevered. Gradually, they noticed water growing warmer. Flying fish leapt alongside them, and bizarre sea birds with bright plumage circled overhead. Arya spent long hours at the bow, scanning for any sign of land. Some nights she had the uneasy sense that distant lights glimmered on the horizon only to vanish when she tried to focus. Phantoms, perhaps, or illusions conjured by the sea. The crew whispered that they might be seeing the lanterns of sunken ghost ships or the reflections of starlight on waves. No one knew. One evening, while the rest of the crew dozed or took short-watch shifts, Arya found herself alone on deck under a pale moon. The sails creaked softly, the ocean calm for once. She gazed up at the shimmering stars and felt something shift within her. A presence. For a moment, it was as though she heard a voice on the breeze, whispering her name. She stiffened, searching the shadows. All she saw was the silhouette of the masts, the gentle sway of the lines. Then her mind drifted to the old gods of the north, to the many-faced god of Bravos, to all the powers she had encountered. She wondered if some god or spirit was guiding her here, or warning her away. The thought faded as quickly as it came, leaving her with only the hush of the sea. They continued thus for months, or so it seemed. Arya lost track of exact days. The men and women of the crew carved notches into a board to mark how long they had been gone from Westeros. Tensions arose occasionally. Scurvy threatened, but they managed to stave it off with dried fruits they had brought along. One sailor insisted they should turn back or risk never finding land again. Captain Morin reminded them that they had come too far to simply sail home with tails between their legs, and the winds made it near impossible to head east for now. They were caught in the rhythms of uncharted waters, drifting west and south in a broad curve. Sometimes Arya caught a faint reflection in the captain's eyes, a fear that maybe no living person had truly crossed these seas before. Then, one afternoon, clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm brewed, thick and ominous. Morin tried to steer away, but the winds shifted violently, driving them toward the roiling darkness. Lightning flickered, thunder boomed, and the waves rose like mountains. The Sunset Maiden pitched and rolled, the crew scrambling to reef the sails before they tore. Sheets of rain hammered the deck. Arya clung to the rigging, salt spray stinging her eyes. The world became a cacophony of water and wind, the sky split by jagged bolts of lightning. More than once, she nearly lost her footing, only to catch herself at the last moment. She heard the crash of barrels below as supplies broke loose. For hours, the storm raged, a relentless fury that threatened to capsize the brig. Morin bellowed commands, the crew struggling valiantly, but the sea was merciless. Sometime after dusk, they struck something, a submerged reef or a rocky outcropping. The hull shuddered, throwing men off their feet. Water flooded in through a jagged tear in the bow. Desperate, the crew tried to patch it from the inside, but the waves pounded relentlessly and the torrential rain made it impossible to see or maneuver properly. Arya rushed to help with the pumps, her muscles straining as she and two others worked the handles to expel water. But the sea was coming in faster than they could bail. A jagged flash of lightning lit the deck. The mainmast creaked ominously, leaning under the force of the gale. A roaring gust snapped the top half of it clean off. With splintered, sails tore, and part of the rigging crashed down. Shouts of alarm rose. Arya ducked, the wind hurling ropes and debris past her. She heard someone scream, a sound swallowed by the thunder. The ship lurched side to side, dangerously close to capsizing. They fought on. Arya had faced armies of the dead, rebels, assassins, yet none of that prepared her for the raw, mindless violence of the storm. Thunder hammered her ears, lightning scorching afterimages across her vision. Captain Morin crawled to the quarterdeck, trying to lash the helm, but a wave slammed him against the rail, sending him tumbling into the sea with a cry. Arya saw his body vanish in a swirl of foam, and in that instant she knew the Sunset Maiden was now leaderless. She scrambled forward, slipping on the rain-slicked deck to where the helm spun wildly. Her arms burned as she tried to turn it. The storm answered with another deafening crash. A wave surged over the prow, tearing away part of the forward deck. The entire vessel groaned like a living creature in its death throes. In the swirling chaos, she clung to the helm with all her strength, her mind whirling with fragments of memory. Winterfell's snow, the Red Keep's courtyard, Ned Stark's steady gaze, the House of Black and White's cold halls. Was this how it ended? Swallowed by the sea, unknown and unmarked, in pursuit of a horizon that might never be reached? A fresh wave pounded the brig, snapping lines, dislodging beams. The hull tore further, water gushing in. Arya felt the deck tilt, heard the screams of the remaining crew as they fought to stay above the torrent. She tried to hold on, but the ship jerked violently beneath her, planks cracking. She lost her grip, tumbling across the deck. She managed to seize hold of a broken rail for a heartbeat before another wave crashed down, dragging her into the churning sea. Icy water slammed her body, driving the air from her lungs. Salt stung her eyes, and the darkness of the storm enveloped everything. She flailed, trying to surface. For a terrifying moment, she sank, pummeled by currents that spun her like a rag doll. She couldn't tell which way was up. The taste of salt filled her throat, and her lungs burned. Needle, strapped at her hip, weighed her down, but she refused to let go. Then, with a desperate kick, she broke the surface, gasping for air. Lightning revealed a world of writhing waves and shattered timbers. The remains of the Sunset Maiden were scattered across the sea, some pieces already submerged. Bodies floated here and there, some moving, some still. Arya struggled to find something to cling to. She spotted a chunk of wreckage, a broken spar. She swam toward it, limbs heavy with exhaustion, the storm's fury still lashing the waters. Her fingers slipped on the wetwood, but she managed to get an arm around it. Another wave rose like a black wall, crashing over her. She coughed, her mind reeling. The wind howled. She thought of her vow to never let fear rule her, but in that moment she felt fear's claws sinking deep. She fought to keep her head above water, spitting out brine, half blind from the constant deluge. Time lost meaning as she clung to the spar, battered by wave after wave. The storm did not abate, and she felt her strength ebbing. At some point, she heard a faint voice, a fellow survivor, or a delirious cry of the wind. She tried to call out, but water filled her mouth. Her heart pounded, refusing to give up. In the flicker of lightning, she glimpsed a final monstrous wave towering above her. It crashed down, wrenching the spar from her arms and slamming her under. Darkness closed in. Her last thought was a murmur of farewell, to Bran, to Sansa, to all of them. Then the cold black sea took her. She dreamed of Winterfell's godwood, the heart tree's red leaves stirring in a silent breeze. She dreamed of the house of black and white, of masks on the wall, each face whispering a secret. She dreamed of standing on the Red Keep's parapets, looking out at a city bathed in sunlight. Through it all, she sensed the presence of her direwolf, Nymeria, guiding her through a forest of memories. Then, a different light pierced the darkness, a warm glow that beckoned her to wake. With a ragged gasp, Arya's eyes snapped open. She lay on a beach, waves lapping around her legs. Rain still fell, but gently now. The sky was a grayish purple, streaked with dawn's light. She coughed violently, expelling salt water from her lungs. Her entire body ached, her limbs trembling. Sand clung to her soaked clothes, and her hair hung in damp strands around her face. Slowly, she forced herself onto her hands and knees, retching up seawater. Each breath was a knife in her chest. When she managed to raise her head, she saw that she was on a narrow strip of shoreline. Above it, jagged cliffs climbed steeply, crowned with unfamiliar vegetation. The beach extended in both directions, the surf rolling onto the sand. Debris from the wreck was scattered along the tide line, broken planks, fragments of sails, crates. She saw no sign of any living person. Her heart sank. Had she been thrown miles from the wreck, or had no one else survived? She crawled further up the beach, away from the reach of the waves. Her arms felt like lead. Every muscle screamed. But she was alive. She clung to that fact, letting it fuel her. Once on drier sand, she collapsed onto her back, gasping for air. Needle still hung at her side, miraculously secured by its strap. The storm's fury had dulled, though thunder rumbled far out to sea. Overhead, the clouds parted slightly, allowing a sliver of sunrise to peek through. Gradually, as her breath steadied, she tried to piece together her situation. The Sunset Maiden was gone. She had no idea if any crew survived. She was on a beach somewhere far west of Westeros, if her sense of direction was correct. That meant she was either on some previously unknown land or a lonely outcropping that would do her no good. Pain radiated from her ribs where she had slammed against something in the water. But she was not bleeding heavily, and no bones seemed broken, at least none that she could detect through the ache. She forced herself to her feet, swaying a little. The sky brightened enough to reveal the coastline more clearly. The beach was narrow and strewn with driftwood. Beyond lay dark rocks and vegetation that looked like a mix of scrub and twisted trees. A gull cried overhead, not a kind she recognized. Its call was harsher, more guttural, echoing against the cliffs. Arya limped along the sand, searching for survivors. She found a single body face down in the surf, a man from the Sunset Maiden's crew. She turned him over gently. He was gone, skin cold. She murmured a brief farewell before moving on. Further up, she discovered a broken crate. Inside were soggy packs of provisions, moldy bread, soaked cloth. She salvaged what she could. Her mind raced with the question of how she would survive if she found no fresh water or game. But first things first, she needed to see if there was a way off this beach, maybe find higher ground or a sign of civilization, though that latter possibility felt like a distant dream. A sudden shout made her freeze. She spun, hand going to needle. The call had come from near a rocky outcrop at the northern edge of the beach. Straining her eyes, she saw a figure. The shape stumbled out of the surf, coughing and sputtering. Another survivor. She jogged toward them, ignoring the protest of her sore muscles. As she approached, she realized it was Tala, the Lysini woman from the crew. The woman's face was contorted with pain, her leg dragging. But she was alive. Relief coursed through Arya. Perhaps more had made it to shore. She helped Tala onto drier sand, checked her injuries. Tala's ankle was twisted, possibly broken, but she seemed otherwise intact. She shivered, teeth chattering from cold and shock. Arya stripped off her own soaked outer jerkin, wringing it out, then helped Tala limp toward a rocky area that might provide some shelter from the wind. As they settled against a boulder, Tala looked around with wide eyes. Where are we? Arya shook her head. I don't know. We survived the wreck and washed ashore here. Have you seen anyone else? Tala shook her head, wincing in pain. No, I just woke up in the surf. Thank the gods you're here. I thought I was alone. Arya offered a grim nod. We need to find better shelter, fresh water, anything. Let's see if we can climb up those cliffs. She gestured inland. But first, we'll look for other survivors or supplies. Can you move if I help you? Tala bit her lip, tears of pain in her eyes. I can try. The two women began a slow journey along the beach, scouring the tide line for any salvageable items. They found some rope, a handful of waterlogged saltfish, a broken spear shaft. No other living people. At length, they reached a spot where the cliff face sloped more gently, forming a precarious path. Arya took Tala's arm and guided her upward. The climb was brutal in their condition. Loose stones skittered beneath their feet, and Tala cried out several times as her ankle twisted. But eventually, they reached flatter ground at the top, panting from exertion. They stood on a plateau of sorts, dotted with wiry bushes and stunted trees. The air was warmer here, and the rain had all but stopped. Arya peered around, scanning the horizon. She saw rolling hills covered in strange vegetation. Inland, a line of peaks rose, their outlines hazy in the morning light. A large bird soared overhead, its wingspan far greater than any eagle she had seen in Westeros, with feathers that flashed russet in the sun. Tala stared in awe. Arya helped her find a spot beneath a leaning tree, its trunk twisted by wind, forming a natural alcove. Stay here. I'm gonna look around. If I can find water or more survivors, I'll come back for you. Try to rest. Tala nodded, eyes wide with fear. Don't be long. There could be beasts or anything. Arya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I'll be careful. She drew needle, inspecting the blade for damage. Amazingly, it seemed intact, though a bit salted and battered. She wiped it with a piece of cloth from her belt, then set off across the plateau. As she walked, she surveyed the landscape carefully. The ground was spongy in places, suggesting underground water or perhaps rainfall collecting in pockets. She saw no immediate signs of large predators, no fresh scat or tracks, though she did spot what looked like small hoofprints near some shrubs. After cresting a small rise, she paused to take in a shallow valley beyond. A meandering stream cut through it, the water glittering in the fresh sunlight. Relief flooded her. There was at least a source of water here. She made her way down the slope toward the stream, stepping gingerly around thorny plants. The air smelled of wet earth and strange blossoms that reminded her of sweetgrass back in the north. Stooping by the stream's edge, she tested the water with her hand, clear and cool. She drank in small gulps, careful not to sicken herself by overindulging too fast after the ordeal. Tasted fresh, not brackish. She refilled her water skin, then stood, wiping her mouth on her sleeve. A soft rustling caught her attention. She froze, listening. In a clump of tall grasses across the stream, something moved. Her first instinct was to reach for Needle, but she held back. Slowly, she crouched behind a cluster of rocks, peering over. The grass parted to reveal a creature about the size of a goat, though its fur was a mottled greenish-brown, blending almost perfectly with the foliage. It had short horns and large ears that twitched as it sniffed the air. Arya watched it carefully, marveling at its camouflage. The creature took a few timid steps to the stream, lowered its head to drink. It seemed harmless enough, a herbivore adapted to this place. Arya wished she had a bow. This might be a source of meat, but she had only her sword, and chasing it down would be difficult. Perhaps she could craft a spear or set traps. For now, she let the animal drink in peace, not wanting to startle it. They were both survivors in an unknown land. After a moment, it caught her scent or a glimpse of her silhouette. The creature bolted, vanishing into the grasses. Arya exhaled. So there was fauna here, presumably meaning predators as well. At least it boded well for Tala's and her chances. With water and potential game, they might survive until they found a way off this land, if they even wished to leave. The idea struck Arya with unexpected force. This was uncharted territory, far from the Seven Kingdoms. She had once yearned for places unknown. She had found one. Now the question remained. Was this the end of her journey, or the beginning of another? She returned to Tala, guiding her to the stream. They drank their fill and washed the salt from their faces. Tala hissed as the cold water touched her swollen ankle, but it offered some relief. Arya found a pair of sturdy branches and tied them together with rope fragments, fashioning a crutch. Tala leaned on it, hobbling with less pain. They decided to follow the stream in hopes of discovering fruit or edible plants. The day grew hotter, the sun blazing overhead. Arya removed her soaked overshirt, tying it around her waist. The land seemed more alive the farther they went. Birds cawed from high branches, insects buzzed in the brush, and now and then, they spotted that goat-like creature darting away. Tala lamented the lack of a net or bough. By afternoon, they stumbled upon a stand of trees bearing pale, gourd-like fruit. Arya cut one open with Needle, sniffing the milky interior. It smelled faintly sweet. Tala tested a morsel, waited, then ate a bit more. The flavor was bland but tolerable, reminiscent of coconuts from the southern islands. They gathered several, sating their hunger somewhat. It was more than they had hoped for after surviving a shipwreck. They followed the stream until it spilled into a shallow pool at the base of a waterfall only a few feet high. The surrounding area was lush with broad-leaved plants that formed a kind of canopy. Tala needed rest. They decided to make camp there. Arya used her sword to cut palm-like fronds and build a makeshift shelter. Tala helped where she could, wincing at each step. The day slipped by in a haze of exhaustion and slow, careful labor. They dared not wander far, mindful of their vulnerability. As night fell, the air cooled. Strange stars appeared overhead. Tala commented that the constellations were all wrong compared to what she knew in Lys. Arya recalled how the stars in Bravos had looked different than those in Winterfell, but never so drastically. Here, entire swaths of sky seemed unfamiliar. They had truly sailed beyond the known world, or so it seemed. A part of Arya felt a thrill of excitement. Another part feared never seeing the North Star again. They huddled in the shelter, listening to nocturnal calls echo among the hills. Some sounded like birds, others like distant howls or screeches. Arya kept Needle close, though she doubted it would suffice against any large predator. She dozed fitfully, lulled by the waterfall's murmur. Her dreams were filled with swirling images of the storm, faces of lost crewmates, and an endless road made of starlight leading ever west. She awoke once to see Tala curled on her side, trembling in uneasy sleep. Arya placed a palm on her shoulder until she calmed. Morning brought a measure of hope. Tala's ankle was still swollen but less painful. They decided to explore further upstream, thinking that might lead to higher ground and a vantage point. The going was slow. Arya fashioned a crude walking staff for herself, using it to balance on the uneven terrain. They saw more of the goat-like creatures and once a large cat prowling on a rocky ledge, watching them with luminous eyes. Arya kept her sword ready, but the cat did not approach. Possibly it had easier prey. By midday, they came to a series of rocky outcroppings that rose above the surrounding hills. They climbed carefully, Tala using her crutch. At the top, they could see for miles. Rolling hills, patches of forested or scrubland, distant peaks veiled in low clouds. No sign of human habitation, no smoke, no roads, no towers. Arya's heart sank a little. Even a scattering of huts would have been a welcome sight. But there was nothing but raw, untamed land. Tala sighed, shading her eyes. What now? Arya surveyed the horizon. We survive. We explore. If there's an ocean on the other side that's calmer, or a beach with driftwood, maybe we can build a raft. Or we might find clues about other people who arrived here, if any. Her voice sounded more confident than she felt. Tala winced, pressing a hand to her injured ankle. You really think others have come? This place could be the edge of the world. Arya remembered the shapeless stories of the Sunset Sea. Perhaps they were indeed at the edge. But her father used to say that one edge is only the beginning of another. She clenched her jaw. We won't know until we search. That afternoon, they descended into a wide valley, cutting across the land in hopes of circling back toward the coast further north. They found game trails, fresh water, and more fruit-bearing trees. Arya improvised snares, though they caught only a few small rodents that Tala refused to eat. They settled for more fruit and the occasional root that Tala recognized from her travels in Essos. Day by day, they traversed the land, setting up temporary camps as Tala slowly recovered enough to walk without the crutch. The weather alternated between sweltering sun and sudden downpours, each shift leaving them exhausted but alive. At times, Arya wondered if they should return to the place they first landed, see if the tide had washed more debris or if any other survivors might appear. But each day they strayed farther inland, chasing the possibility of a vantage that might reveal a distant settlement. They discovered an abundance of life, flocks of colorful birds, insects that glowed at twilight, lizards with frilled necks that hissed when approached. More than once, Arya spotted huge tracks in the mud as though some large beast roamed at night. She felt uneasy each time, but they never encountered the creature directly. Perhaps it was shy or nocturnal. Weeks passed, or so they guessed. Tala's ankle improved to the point of mild discomfort rather than sharp pain. They established a more permanent shelter near a stream, building a lean-to from branches and leaves. Tala grew adept at weaving baskets from dried reeds, allowing them to carry more fruit. Arya learned to identify which mushrooms were safe to eat. Necessity forged them into a two-person tribe. Still, they longed for a sign of rescue or at least another clue that they were not alone. One evening, as they returned from a foraging trek, Tala stopped in her tracks. Do you smell that? Arya inhaled. At first, she only caught the usual sense of damp earth and foliage. Then a faint whiff of something acrid reached her nose. Smoke. Her eyes widened, heart leaping. Fire. Could it be lightning-struck trees, or could it be a campfire? She motioned for Tala to stay quiet. They moved carefully through the brush, following the smell. Soon, the smoky tang grew stronger, mingling with the crisp odor of burning wood. Arya parted a cluster of tall fronds, and there, in a small clearing, they saw a flicker of orange flame. A makeshift fire crackled in a circle of stones. A figure crouched beside it, adding branches. The figure wore ragged clothes, hair matted. Pale skin, gaunt features, eyes reflecting desperation. Arya froze. Whoever this person was, they did not look local. In fact, they looked Westerosi? She gently signaled Tala to stay back, then stepped forward, making noise so as not to startle the stranger into violence. The figure whirled around, brandishing a piece of driftwood like a club. Arya met their gaze, a bearded man with a wild look in his eyes, an expression that flickered between fear and relief. His lip quivered. Seven hells, it's you? Arya's mind raced. She recognized the man vaguely. He had been part of the Sunset Maiden's crew, though she never learned his name. He had a distinctive scar on his chin. He stared at her as if she were a ghost. Tala emerged behind Arya, gasping as she recognized him. He lowered his makeshift club, tears welling in his eyes. I can't believe I found someone alive. They approached carefully, exchanging stories in rushed breaths. His name was Garen, a sailor from the Stormlands. He had washed ashore further south, survived on rainwater and scraps of seaweed, eventually heading inland. He had started this fire mere hours ago, hoping to scare off a predator he had seen stalking him the previous night. Arya and Tala listened, feeling a surge of hope. There were three of them now, a stronger chance of building a real camp or exploring more efficiently. In the following days, they pooled resources, gathering enough materials to fashion crude spears and a better shelter. Garen showed them how to start a fire with flint he found in the rocks, reducing their reliance on luck when it came to lightning or friction. Tala tested some local plants for medicinal properties, helping Garen recover from an infected cut on his arm. Arya hunted small game, once managing to bring down one of the goat-like creatures by cornering it near a rocky slope. The meat proved tough but nourishing. They were forging a precarious survival akin to how the first men might have lived millennia ago. But none of them had forgotten the wider goal to find a way back, or at least a way forward. Could they build a seaworthy raft? Could they discover a path leading to some hidden civilization that might exist in these unknown lands? The menacing signs of large predators still hung over them. One night, they heard roars echo through the hills, a guttural sound that set their hearts pounding. In the morning, they found enormous footprints near a stream, each print bigger than Arya's head. They decided to keep moving, seeking higher ground or a vantage from which to survey the coast again. Over time, they made slow progress northward. The terrain grew steeper, the vegetation changing from tropical to a more temperate mix. Nights grew cooler, though not cold. They discovered a deep canyon that forced them to detour east. Eventually, they reached a ridge with a sweeping view of the western sea. Far below, waves crashed against rocky cliffs, sending up plumes of white spray. Arya gazed at that expanse, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the Sunset Maiden was gone and no ship waited to carry them onward. Could they fashion a craft big enough to navigate those turbulent waters? It seemed impossible with their meager tools. Tala sank to the ground, exhausted. "We might be trapped here," she whispered. Garen didn't respond, but Arya saw the despair in his eyes. She tightened her jaw. "Let's keep moving. There's got to be a better place to descend. Maybe a beach with driftwood or a cove where the water is calmer." So they pressed on day by day. Survival became routine in a land that proved both bountiful and treacherous. They found a wide river that spilled into the sea, its mouth forming a sheltered lagoon. The tide swept in, bringing fish they could spear in the shallow water. They built a new camp there, hoping that if they ever managed to construct a raft, the lagoon would offer a safer launching point than the open cliffs. While Tala and Garen foraged inland, Arya explored the lagoon's perimeter, searching for suitable logs or large driftwood. She found several fallen trees near the water's edge, but they were partially rotted. Further inland, the forests might yield sturdier timber, but they had no proper axes, only sharpened stones and their short spears. The work of chopping down trees and hauling them to the lagoon would be monumental. Days turned to weeks as they attempted it, hacking at one trunk after another, fashioning rudimentary sleds to drag the timber. Their hands blistered and bled. Tala's ankle swelled again. Garen developed a persistent cough. Yet they refused to give up. One late afternoon, after a grueling day of hauling logs, they took a break by the water. The sun slanted low, painting the sky with fiery oranges. Garen coughed into his hand, frowning at the flecks of blood. Tala rubbed her temples, grimacing. Arya stared at the half-finished raft they had lashed together, a pitiful structure of logs and vines. Could it hold even 2 people in the open sea, let alone 3? The prospect felt dire. In the fading light, she sensed a familiar bleakness creeping over them. Survival was possible here, but returning to Westeros or any known land seemed beyond their grasp. She recalled her oath to see the unknown edges of the world. She had indeed found them, but the cost was beyond anything she had anticipated. Perhaps they would live out their days as castaways, forging a small life in a new land. The thought weighed on her, not entirely a nightmare, yet not the freedom she had envisioned. Where was the next horizon? She rose and walked along the shore, letting the waves lap at her feet. The ocean's roar filled her ears. She remembered the house of black and white, the voice of Jaqen Hagar telling her that a girl could become no one. She remembered her kill list, the faces of those she had slain. She remembered the vow of the Kingsguard, the white cloak she had worn with pride. All these memories jostled within her, threatening to drown her in regrets. She took a steadying breath, focusing on the here and now. She was alive, and that had to mean something. Dusk settled into night. They lit a fire in a shallow pit, cooking what little fish they had. The moon rose, a different shape than in Westeros, though a full orb nonetheless, illuminating the lagoon with silver light. Arya's mind drifted to the possibility of exploring the land further. Perhaps there were other coasts, other places to attempt departure. Or maybe there was indeed some hidden civilization. The notion of traveling aimlessly forever, though, sapped her spirit. She almost missed the dusty corners of the Red Keep. At least there, she had known her role. She dozed off by the fire, leaning against a log. Her dreams were restless, swirling with images of storms and swirling crows. Suddenly, she jerked awake, heart pounding. The night was silent except for the hushed lapping of water. She sat up, scanning the darkness. Garen and Tala slept nearby, their bodies curled close to the fire's dying embers. All seemed calm, and yet, a strange prickling sensation crawled across Arya's skin. She stood and walked to the water's edge, the moon reflecting off the lagoon. Something about the reflection seemed off. She squinted. In the reflection, shapes moved, shadows that crossed the moon's face. Clouds, perhaps? She looked up. No clouds. The sky was relatively clear. Then, along the horizon beyond the lagoon's mouth, she glimpsed a flicker of light. At first, she thought it was a star near the waterline. But it moved, bobbing gently. Her pulse quickened. Could it be a lantern on a ship? She rubbed her eyes, wondering if exhaustion had conjured illusions. The light persisted. Another joined it, a faint glow. They drifted closer, revealing themselves as separate points. Arya swallowed a gasp. She raced back to the camp, shaking Tala and Garen awake. They stumbled to their feet, blinking. "What is it?" Tala murmured. Arya pointed to the horizon. "Lights. On the water. I think it's ships." They hurried to the shore, peering out at the lagoon's mouth. Indeed, two distant lights glowed, and the shapes beneath them suggested vessels with sails. They were approaching the cove, or at least passing nearby. Arya's heart hammered. This could mean salvation or danger. If they were pirates or slavers, they might be hostile. But if they were explorers or traders or anything else, it might be their only chance to leave this lonely land. They scrambled to stoke the fire, piling on driftwood and dry branches. The flames leapt higher, sending sparks into the night. Garen grabbed a brand, waving it above his head in the hopes that someone aboard the ships might see. The lights in the distance seemed to pause, as if noticing their signal. A wave of hope swept through the castaways. Then, slowly, the points of light veered, heading into the lagoon. Arya's heart pounded. She urged the others to stand behind her, sword in hand, in case the newcomers were foes. The night air grew tense. The crackle of the fire and the rolling of the distant surf were the only sounds. Then, across the moonlit waters, they heard faint voices, shouts in a language Arya didn't immediately recognize. The ships drew closer, shapes emerging from the darkness. They were smaller than the Sunset Maiden, with sleek hulls and triangular sails reminiscent of some summer island designs. Figures moved on their decks, carrying torches. When they were close enough to make out details, Arya raised her arms in a gesture of peace, sword sheathed. Tala and Garen did the same. The first ship lowered a rowboat. A handful of figures descended, rowing toward the shore. Arya resisted the urge to call out, uncertain if they spoke the common tongue. The rowboat scraped onto the sand, and 4 individuals climbed out, 3 men and a woman, all dressed in layered fabrics, armed with short spears or curved blades. Their skin tones ranged from light bronze to dark brown, their hair braided with ornaments. They looked as wary as Arya felt. One stepped forward, raising a hand. He spoke words that Arya did not know, fluid and musical. She shook her head, pointing to herself. "Arya," she said slowly, then gestured to her companions. "Tala, Garen?" She touched her chest. "We crashed. Shipwreck." She pantomimed the waves and a sinking vessel. The strangers conferred among themselves. Then the woman stepped forward, haltingly forming words that might have been an attempt at the common tongue. "You from East? Where?" Arya exhaled in relief that some communication was possible. "Westeros. We come from Far East, yes? Our ship destroyed in a storm." She motioned around them. "We are stranded." The woman nodded, scanning their ragged clothes. Arya noticed the strangers had gold tattoos around their wrists, possibly symbols of rank or achievements. The man who had first spoken relaxed slightly, lowering his spear. He said something in his own tongue, and the others followed suit, stepping forward to offer gestures of assistance. Arya felt tears prick her eyes. Hope. They might be saved. Or at least they had found people who could offer them more than endless wandering. Tala limped forward, pointing at her ankle. One of the newcomers crouched to examine it, then nodded in understanding. He turned to the rowboat and produced a small bundle of herbs or salves. Arya watched in amazement as he applied a pungent paste to Tala's injury, wrapping it with cloth. Tala winced but managed a grateful nod. Garen coughed violently. The woman with the short blade handed him a small flask of some liquid. He sipped it, gasping at the taste, but his breathing eased a moment later. Encouraged, Arya tried to explain that they wished to leave this land. She pointed to the water, mimicking a sailing motion. "We want to sail," she said. The strangers exchanged looks, then beckoned them to the rowboat. One gestured for them to follow to the ship. Arya hesitated. She had no idea who these people were or what their intentions might be. But the alternative was remaining here, scraping out a life until they died. She glanced at Tala and Garen. Both seemed ready to risk it. They boarded the rowboat, bobbing on the gentle waves. The strangers rowed back to the first ship, where more faces peered over the rail. Once aboard, the newcomers offered them woven blankets, a small cask of fresh water, and some dried fish that tasted far better than anything they had eaten in weeks. They sat on the deck, exhausted and grateful. Arya found herself weeping silently, though she didn't quite know why. Perhaps the release of all that fear and despair. Tala patted her shoulder, tears in her own eyes. Garen lay back, breathing shallowly but more steadily, pressing the flask of strange medicine to his chest. The woman who spoke a bit of the common tongue knelt beside Arya, pointing to herself. "Callow," she said, then gestured to her people, naming them in turn. Each name was unfamiliar, but Arya repeated them quietly, trying to memorize them. Callow tapped her own chest again. "Lenora, our land." She pointed west. "Sail, Tili, big city, safe." She made a sweeping gesture, as though describing a grand port or settlement. Arya's heart pounded. A city? There was a city west of Westeros, or at least west of their current location. Could it be that these people had an entire civilization here, beyond the knowledge of any in the Seven Kingdoms? Her mind swirled with questions, but she had no words to ask them. She only nodded. "We go with you," she said softly, hoping that Callow understood. If Tili was a city, perhaps they would find a real chance of returning home, or forging a new home entirely. The two ships hoisted sails once more, navigating the lagoon's exit in the moonlight. Arya and her companions huddled under blankets near the stern, too exhausted to do more than watch. The strangers worked with practiced efficiency, their sails triangular and their rigging far different from Westerosi design. The vessels moved swiftly despite their small size. Soon, they were cutting through the open water, leaving the lagoon and the wreck-littered coast behind. Arya clutched Needle to her side, a final relic of her old life. She stared at the dark horizon, her pulse still racing from the sudden turn of events. In her wildest dreams, she had never imagined discovering a new land, let alone an entire people. She thought of King Bran, of Sansa, of all Westeros behind her. This was no fleeting journey. She had stepped into a new realm of possibilities, a world that might reshape her destiny once again. The salted wind brushed her cheek, carrying the promise of an unknown future. She had survived a shipwreck, found allies in adversity, and now sailed toward Tili, a city no map in the Seven Kingdoms had ever named. As the moonlight glistened on the waves, Arya allowed herself a small smile. She recalled the vow that had bound her once, the white cloak she had worn, and all the choices that led her here. She was still Arya Stark of Winterfell, forged by every trial she had faced, but she was also a voyager now, stepping beyond every horizon her forebears had known. Whatever awaited in this land, be it danger, wonder, or a path home, she would meet it with needle in hand, heart steady, and eyes open wide. The road went ever on, and she would follow it, the Wolf of the North, unbound and unafraid. They sailed away from the unknown coast under a sky streaked with moonlight. The two ships moved in tandem, forging westward across calmer seas, their triangular sails taut in the shifting wind. Arya, huddled under a woolen blanket near the stern, clutched Needle as if it were a lifeline. Tala and Garen sat close, propped against the ship's low railing, each of them dazed by hunger, exhaustion, and the astonishing fact that they were no longer alone in this uncharted realm. Their rescuers, strangers with bronzed skin, intricate tattoos, and a lilting tongue, proved watchful but not hostile. A slender woman named Callow, who spoke halting fragments of the common tongue, lingered nearby. Now and then she would point at the stars or the horizon, offering single words in an effort to teach and learn. That first night aboard, Arya dozed fitfully. She opened her eyes at intervals to see unfamiliar faces passing by in the GL. The tang of the ocean thick in her nostrils. Always, the same questions churned in her mind. Who are these people? Where do they come from? Is there truly a city called Tili, or do we sail to some new danger? Now and again, she thought she heard a faint rush of wings overhead, but when she craned her neck, she could see only the violet-black sky and unfamiliar constellations. Morning arrived in a wash of gold and pale rose. It found Arya stiff and sore, bracing herself against the gentle roll of the deck. Tala slept with her head on Garen's shoulder, her leg wrapped in the bandages Kalos people had applied. Garen himself shivered under a coarse blanket, his cough persistent but less severe than the night before. Around them, sailors busied themselves adjusting ropes or measuring the wind's direction. A few stood at the prow, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. On the sister ship, visible just ahead, figures also moved about, the flash of sunlight catching on the bright fabrics they wore. Arya rose and approached Callow, who knelt by a small cooking hearth set into a metal bracket on the deck. The hearth's coals glowed orange, heating a blackened pot that smelled of fish and pungent herbs. Callow stirred slowly, gave Arya a nod, and said something in her melodic tongue that Arya couldn't decipher. Then, with a gentle smile, Callow lifted a ladle to the pot, scooped out some steaming broth, and offered it in a wooden bowl. Arya accepted with murmured thanks. The first sip tasted salty and strong, but after so many days of near starvation, it was delicious. She forced herself not to gulp it all at once. Garen, woken by the aroma, edged closer, and Callow motioned for him to wait patiently while she prepared a second portion. As Arya ate, she studied the ship's curious design. Rather than the broad, heavy hulls common to Westeros, these vessels were sleeker, built for speed. Their prows were carved into stylized serpents or sea creatures, and each had two angled masts bearing large, lateen sails. The wood was darker than most timbers Arya knew, and the nails or rivets that held the hull together seemed to be fashioned of a coppery alloy. Despite the smaller size, the deck wasn't cramped. There were compartments beneath, though she'd seen no sign of large cargo holds. She supposed the second ship might carry more supplies. Around her, half a dozen sailors moved in easy confidence, conversing in that rolling language. It reminded her a little of the Rhoynish dialect she had once heard in Dorne, but it was richer, filled with fluid syllables and clicks. The day's wind blew steady from the east, carrying them onward into waters that shone cobalt in the sunlight. Arya breathed in, feeling her strength slowly return. She tried to set aside worry and dread. For better or worse, they were no longer stranded. If Tili was real, if some city thrived in this unknown region, then perhaps a path home existed, or else a new life for the three castaways. She felt a pang at the thought of Westeros. Would anyone know what had become of her? Bran, with his far-seeing powers, might sense her survival. Or maybe her siblings had concluded she was lost at sea, gone to the watery grave that had claimed so many before her. The memory of her father, of Jon, of Sansa flickered at the edges of her mind, but she pressed it away, focusing on the immediate reality of the deck under her feet and the salted wind against her face. For the next few days, they sailed in a wide arc south and west, guided by the helmsman's careful watch of the sun and the tides. Callow continued her attempts to communicate, teaching them the names of simple objects: water, food, sun, sail, star. In turn, Arya offered common tongue words, pointing at her sword and saying sword, at the sky and saying sky. Callow repeated these words with a thoughtful tilt of her head, then responded in her own language, shaping each syllable slowly so Arya might catch the nuances. Tala, too, joined in whenever her foot wasn't paining her, and Garen followed along with a quiet eagerness that offset his fatigue. At night, the crew gathered around a small brazier, singing soft songs whose tunes rose and fell like ocean swells. Arya sometimes caught the phrase Tili repeated, whispered by a woman with braided hair or spoken with reverence by the helmsman. Each time, the eyes of these sailors seemed to glow with anticipation, as if Tili were more than just a place, it was a beacon. At last, the morning came when one of the crew at the prow let out a cry, pointing ahead. The rest converged on the bow, shading their eyes. Arya, Tala, and Garen joined them, squinting at the horizon. Through the haze of early sunlight, Arya detected a dark line rising from the sea. At first, she thought it might be clouds, but the outline sharpened, revealing tall cliffs or perhaps a massive headland. Excitement rippled through the sailors. Callow turned to Arya, smiling wide, and said, "Lenora." She pointed. Then she tapped her own chest. "Callow, people of Lenora." Arya nodded in understanding. Lenora, she guessed, was the name of either the land or the entire region. She had gleaned as much from the scattered words Callow had spoken that first night. "We are from Lenora." Now that they were near, Arya's heart fluttered. How large was Lenora? Was Teely a port city hidden somewhere along those craggy cliffs? And what manner of realm flourished here, undiscovered by any Westerosi explorer? The ship steered closer. The coastline loomed into view, revealing sheer cliffs of mottled red rock plunging into the surf. Far above, gull-like birds wheeled and cried. As they rounded a promontory, Arya saw a long stretch of shoreline unfold, gentle slopes of green that gave way to rolling hills further inland, a landscape reminiscent of the Stormlands, though more vibrant under a sun that seemed stronger. Her breath caught when the prow of their ship angled into a wide bay. At the mouth, wave-battered rocks framed the entrance, but beyond lay calmer waters reflecting the turquoise sky. And at the far curve of this bay, built along a broad river delta, rose a city. Arya stood transfixed. The city spread out in concentric terraces, each carved from the rocky hillside. Buildings of pale stone glimmered in the sun, their rooftops painted in vivid hues, purple, green, gold, and crimson. A massive wall encircled the city's lower level, studded with squat towers that shone with copper or brass fittings. Beyond the walls, ships of varying sizes bobbed in a vast harbor, some moored at piers that jutted like arms into the bay, others anchored in deeper water. Flags or pennants fluttered from their masts, bearing symbols Arya had never seen. High above everything, perched near the uppermost terrace, stood a grand edifice of arches and domes, perhaps a palace or temple, its walls gleaming like mother of pearl. Callow murmured "Teely" in a tone of reverence, gesturing with her hands to indicate the entire expanse. The crew echoed her, some pressing fists to their chests. Garen's eyes grew round. Tala clasped Arya's arm. Even from this distance, Teely gave the impression of bustle and prosperity, a seat of culture that rivaled the free cities of Essos, though its architecture looked unlike anything Arya had witnessed in Bravos or Pentos. Perhaps in all of history, no Westerosi had glimpsed such a sight. As they approached the harbor, Arya felt a fluttering sensation in her stomach, equal parts excitement and dread. Would these people welcome foreigners who arrived half-dead from the sea? Or would they be treated as curiosities, potentially threatening or worthless? She reminded herself that Callow's people had rescued them, fed them, and showed no sign of malice. But a city's rulers might think differently from its sailors. The harbor itself was a riot of color and noise. Buildings made from pale stone and carved timber lined the waterfront, fronted by wide docks where merchants in loose-fitting attire unloaded crates or sacks from the holds of newly arrived vessels. Dockworkers wore bright tunics belted at the waist, mingling with sailors from countless ships. Arya spied vessels that looked akin to the ones they arrived on, but also squat barges with shallow hulls, two-masted caravels with flamboyant figureheads, even a handful of canoes fitted with outriggers. On one pier, a group of fisherwomen hauled nets laden with silver-scaled fish. On another, a line of servants carried amphorae from a galley with a red serpent design on its sails. The language of Teely and presumably of Lenora rose in a steady hum, punctuated by laughter or sharp commands. Everywhere, Arya saw the same patterns of tattoos and braided hair, though the designs varied from person to person. Some sported swirling lines across their arms, others geometric shapes in black or gold ink along their temples. Their own ships maneuvered toward a pier lined with tall, slightly curved pillars draped in cloth banners. Callow and two other sailors called out greetings to the people on the dock, who cheered and waved. As the ships were moored, a small group of guards arrived, men and women wearing matching tunics of dark green, each carrying a short spear or curved sword. Their hair was tied back, and they had a gold band tattooed across the brow, signifying authority. Arya tensed. She let her hand hover near Needle, though she kept it sheathed, not wanting to appear hostile. Tala and Garen remained close behind her, their expressions uncertain. Callow disembarked first, exchanging bows with the guards. Then she turned and beckoned Arya, Tala, and Garen to follow. They stepped onto the pier, the sun warm on their faces, the planks solid after so long drifting at sea. The air smelled of spices, salt, and a faint hint of incense. Dozens of curious onlookers pressed near, craning for a better glimpse of these pale-faced newcomers in tattered clothes. Arya felt their gazes like 100 small needles, but she forced a steady expression. A hush fell when one of the green-uniformed guards, evidently a captain, approached them. He regarded them with keen interest, then addressed Callow in that melodious language. She responded earnestly, gesturing at the castaways. Now and then, Arya caught the words Westeros and shipwreck. She was grateful at least that her homeland's name might carry some meaning here, though she doubted these people had any direct knowledge of it. The captain's stern face softened at whatever Callow said, and he nodded. Then, in halting common tongue, he addressed Arya and the others. "Welcome. City Tili. You come." He tapped his own chest. "I am Soren." His accent was thick, but he spoke with deliberate care. "You follow. We help." He beckoned them onward. Arya met Tala's eyes. The Lyseni woman offered a half-smile as if to say we have no choice. Garen let out a weak cough but managed to straighten his posture, leaning on the staff Callow's crew had given him. Without further discussion, they accompanied Soren and the guards away from the pier along a stone walkway that opened onto a broad quay. Fisherfolk, porters, and merchants parted to let them pass, chattering in hushed tones. Some children darted close, bold enough to gawk at Arya's sword or at Tala's bandaged ankle. One little girl tried to touch Arya's hair, giggling as she compared it to her own dark braids. Arya offered a tentative smile in return, an odd twinge of homesickness surging as she recalled how children in King's Landing had once stared at her as the scruffy northern girl. They crossed a paved square where rows of bright awnings protected stalls selling baskets of fruit, jars of spice, and bolts of dyed cloth. The scents were intoxicating: cloves, pepper, ginger, and others Arya couldn't name. Up close, the city's architecture dazzled her. The buildings rose 2 or 3 stories, with wide windows lacking glass but fitted with wooden shutters or woven screens. Many bore carved reliefs of plants, animals, or abstract designs that swirled across the walls. Vibrant murals depicted scenes of daily life or mythic events, though Arya couldn't decipher any specific tale. The closer they drew to the central district, the more elaborate the carvings, with inlays of polished stone or bits of metal that gleamed in the sun. At last, they reached a street that curved uphill, lined with tall trees whose leaves were shaped like broad fans. The guards led them up this street, occasionally pausing for Soren to exchange words with passers-by who looked on in curiosity. Arya tried to remain calm, mindful that her sword might alarm them. Yet Soren hadn't tried to confiscate it, which was a small mercy. Callow walked by Arya's side, shooting her the occasional reassuring glance. They ascended to a higher terrace of the city. From here, Arya could look back and see the bay spread out in a shimmering arc. Ships clustered like toys in the harbor. Garen's breath came in ragged puffs, but he plodded on. Tala clenched her jaw, her injured ankle slowing her steps, but she refused to complain. The street flattened into a broad plaza bordered by colonnades. In the middle rose a fountain shaped like an immense spiral shell, water spilling from its tip. Everywhere, small trees grew in pots or planters, their purple blossoms releasing a gentle perfume. Statues of robed figures lined the edges, each statue bearing inscriptions that looked both geometric and fluid. A script Arya guessed was the written language of Lenora. At the far side of the plaza stood a complex of buildings joined by archways. They were made of the same pale stone, but they stood out for their intricate mosaics in pastel colors, forming patterns of waves and stars. Soren led them inside, passing under a high vaulted ceiling. Arya noticed how the walls were engraved with swirling lines like ocean currents. The place had a serene hush, broken only by the echo of their footsteps. At intervals, robed attendants or scribes shuffled by, carrying tablets or scrolls. Some paused to stare at the newcomers, though they bowed respectfully to Soren. In a large antechamber, Soren stopped and signaled Arya, Tala, and Garen to wait. Then he conferred with Callow. Arya caught fragments of the conversation. The name Koraith repeated several times, plus gestures that suggested a physician or healer. Tala sagged with relief at the prospect. Soren turned back to them, speaking carefully in common tongue. "You wait. Koraith come. He wise man. Heal." He mimed checking an arm, then pointed to Garen's chest. "Cough. He help." Garen, who leaned heavily on his staff, murmured thanks. Soren nodded, evidently understanding the gratitude. Then the guard captain stepped back, and Callow ushered them toward a low stone bench set against the wall. Tiled patterns of swirling shells covered the floor. A mild incense smell lingered, reminiscent of sandalwood or something akin to it. Arya tried to calm her racing heart. This place reminded her distantly of the Citadel in Old Town or the Red Keep's halls when the royal court was in session, an air of official authority, a hush of knowledge or protocol. She could only guess what awaited them here. Would this Karaith question them, pass judgment, or simply offer healing? Before long, a soft shuffle of footsteps drew her gaze. An older man approached, a figure draped in layered robes of pale green and gold, his head shaved except for a short tuft at the crown. Intricate tattoos circled his neck like a ruff, and he carried a carved staff that clacked on the tiles with each step. His eyes were large and inquisitive. Behind him came a handful of acolytes or assistants bearing satchels and baskets. Sauron bowed deeply, greeting the newcomer with respect. The old man, clearly Karaith, nodded, then crossed to the castaways. Up close, Arya could see faint wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the signs of age, but also an undeniable sharpness in his gaze. Karaith knelt by Garen first, touching his forehead and making a clucking noise. He spoke a few words to his assistants, who immediately produced jars of ointment and a water gourd. One acolyte helped Garen drink while another carefully dabbed something on his chest. Garen flinched, but he let them work. Meanwhile, Karaith turned to Tala, who extended her bandaged ankle. Karaith unwrapped it, prodded gently, and nodded with approval at the existing dressing. He replaced it with fresh cloth steeped in a sweet-smelling herbal brew. Tala winced but tried to smile in thanks. Finally, Karaith looked to Arya, scanning her for injuries. She wasn't obviously wounded aside from bruises and a few minor cuts, so he simply placed his palm over her forehead as if taking her temperature. Then he drew back, muttering something to Sauron and Callow. Arya guessed he deemed her well enough. Sauron addressed them all. Karaith, say you heal here. He gestured around the hall. Stay. Safe. Eat. Then speak with city council. His accent mangled the words, but his meaning was clear enough. Tala and Garen traded glances, relief in their eyes. Arya nodded cautiously. Perhaps they would be confined within these walls or supervised, but at least they'd have shelter and treatment. She thought of the times in Westeros where strangers would receive a far harsher reception, imprisonment, or worse. Here, these Talayan people seemed determined to show hospitality before suspicion. It might be that Tala's customs favored welcoming travelers or that their city was built on trade from wide-ranging ships. Regardless, Arya was grateful. Several acolytes guided the trio to a side corridor where they entered a spacious chamber lined with wooden screens. The temperature inside was pleasantly cool. Cushions lay on low stone platforms and tall vases of fresh flowers brightened the corners. The acolytes indicated that they should remove their salty, tattered garments and wash themselves at the small stone basins. Arya hesitated only a moment. She had grown used to caution, but she saw no threat here. Tala and Garen seemed equally tentative, though necessity won out. They stripped off what remained of their old clothes, which the acolytes took away for cleaning or disposal, and then they rinsed themselves with lukewarm water poured from bronze ewers. Arya hissed at the sting in her scrapes and bruises, but the water felt like a blessing after so many days of filth. She remembered how, as a young girl in Winterfell, she despised baths. Now, she could have sung praises to the Seven for the simple gift of being clean. When they were done, the acolytes handed them fresh tunics of soft linen dyed in subtle pastels, pale green for Tala, a gentle ochre for Garen, and a muted lavender for Arya. They were plain but comfortable, tied with a belt of braided hemp. Arya eyed them curiously, then slipped the tunic over her head, adjusting the belt to keep the cloth from snagging on needle. She refused to part with her sword, which seemed to puzzle the acolytes, but they did not insist. One of them offered her a small comb for her hair. She accepted, working through the tangles and salt-crusted knots as best she could. In the reflection of the polished metal bowl that served as a mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was leaner, her cheeks sun-darkened. Yet her gray eyes were the same, flickering with the stubborn resilience that had carried her through so many trials. They emerged from the washing chamber, feeling more human than they had in weeks. Karaith himself appeared in the corridor to check on their condition. He placed a palm lightly on Tala's forehead, nodded with satisfaction, then beckoned them to follow. He led them to a covered walkway that overlooked a central courtyard. There, gardens of lush greenery surrounded a tranquil pool stocked with tiny fish. Stone lanterns stood at intervals, each carved with swirling patterns that matched the motifs Arya had seen throughout the city. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers and sweet herbs. It was a place designed for calm reflection, a stark contrast to the clamor of the harbor and the restless nights at sea. Karaith guided them toward a shaded pavilion overlooking this courtyard. Low tables stood upon ornate rugs, and attendants were already setting out bowls of food and drink. Arya's stomach rumbled at the sight of freshly cut fruit, stewed grains, and grilled fish seasoned with something that smelled faintly like coriander. A pitcher of cool water gleamed with condensation. The attendants bowed, indicating the visitors should sit. Garen lowered himself carefully, mindful of his sore body. Tala did the same, resting her bandaged ankle on a cushion. Arya hesitated, but hunger won out. She dropped to her knees beside Tala. Karaith seated himself opposite them, staff across his lap, while two acolytes took positions at his side. No one spoke at first. Perhaps this was a ritual of sorts, or maybe the Talayan custom was to let guests taste the food before conversation. Karaith took a single slice of pear-like fruit and ate it, then gestured for them to do the same. Arya bit into the fruit. Its flesh was crisp and tangy, leaving a sweet aftertaste that reminded her of apples from the north, though with a tropical twist. She suppressed a tear that threatened to form. Something about the flavor stirred memories of home, a place she might never see again. Tala and Garen also ate, each with a look of grateful wonder. Soon, they tried the fish, discovering it was marinated in citrus and a peppery spice that made their tongues tingle. The grains were soft and slightly sweet, mixed with diced vegetables reminiscent of onions and peppers. Despite the unfamiliar flavors, or perhaps because of them, Arya felt warm satisfaction blooming in her chest. Karaith observed them with an appraising gaze, then spoke a few words to his acolytes. One fetched a wooden tray bearing small clay cups. A jug of thick, milky liquid was poured into each cup, filling the air with a sweet, fermented aroma. Karaith sipped first. When he seemed satisfied, Tala took a cautious drink. Her eyes widened in surprise at the tangy flavor, but she smiled slightly. Garen followed, and Arya last of all. The beverage was smooth yet had a subtle bite, some sort of fermented plant milk or fruit brew. It left a warm sensation in her throat, easing the tightness she hadn't realized she was carrying. They finished the meal with little conversation beyond shared nods and attempts at a few words. Karaith tried something in common tongue, but he knew only a handful of expressions. Arya guessed that Kallo had the best grasp of Westerosi words out of all of them. Indeed, soon after they finished eating, Kallo appeared at the pavilion's edge, bowing to Karaith. She spoke quietly to him, and he responded, rising from his seat. The old man tapped his staff on the floor twice, signifying something. Then, with a kindly glance at the trio, he departed, leaving Kallo in charge. She stepped forward and greeted them in her stilted common tongue. "You, rest. See city," she said, sounding both excited and cautious. "Tomorrow, meet Council Tili. They ask questions. Good questions." She frowned, searching for words. "Where from? Why come? Then, help you." She pointed to Garen's chest. "Cough." She mimed a wave. "Karaith fix. Then all good." Arya nodded. "We understand. Thank you." Kallo managed a smile of relief at the successful exchange. She gestured for them to stand, leading them out of the pavilion and into another corridor that branched off the main walkway. At its end lay a suite of small rooms with simple beds, each room separated by woven screens. The windows overlooked the courtyard's garden, letting in a faint trickle of fountain music. Tala sank onto the nearest bed gratefully, wincing as she set her foot down. Garen took another bed, propping himself up with pillows. Arya lingered in the corridor, leaning on the windowsill, feeling the warmth of the late afternoon sun. She could hardly believe they were in a foreign city so far from home that no map in Westeros depicted it. In the hush of that moment, her memories stirred. She recalled the vow she had once taken as part of the Kingsguard in King's Landing, how she had worn the white cloak to protect her brother, King Bran. She had never imagined this journey leading her so far to a land that existed beyond the imagination of any she had known. A pang of guilt flickered through her. Had she broken faith with her family by coming here? Or was she simply following the thread of fate, as her father once taught her to do with unwavering determination? She reminded herself that Bran had released her from the vow, that her service had been honored and completed. Even so, she wished she could tell her siblings she was alive, that she hadn't perished. But that was impossible unless the folk of Tili possessed magic to span oceans in the blink of an eye. The next day dawned with soft birdsong echoing from the garden. Arya, Tala, and Garen awoke to find more fresh clothes laid out, simple garments in the Talayan style, well-fitting enough and dyed in subtle earth tones. They had a light breakfast of fruit and flatbread. Kallo soon arrived with a handful of guards, inviting them to follow her deeper into the complex of buildings. Tala's ankle was doing better, thanks to the salves, and Garen's cough had lessened, though he still cleared his throat now and then. Arya felt a faint tingle of anticipation. Meeting the city council would mean subjecting themselves to scrutiny. Would Tili's leaders see them as potential threats, curiosities, or guests? They entered a spacious hall with columns carved in wave-like spirals. At the far end stood a dais where a semicircle of elevated seats held a gathering of men and women in elaborate attire. Each wore layered robes of teal or sapphire embroidered with shimmering thread that caught the light. Their tattoos varied, some had gold filigree along their forearms, others had swirling patterns across their cheeks. Karaith was among them, seated to one side. Sauron stood at attention behind the chairs, flanked by a few other guards. The central figure, an older woman whose braided hair was streaked with silver, appeared to be the highest authority. She inclined her head as the newcomers approached. Callow guided them to the center of the hall, bowing deeply. Arya and her companions followed suit, uncertain of Talayan customs but not wanting to insult anyone. The older woman spoke in a clear, resonant voice, and Callow translated in fits and starts. She is Arya, keeper of the tides, leading the city with counsel. Callow paused, listening, then continued. Council welcomes you as stranded travelers. They want to know how you came. They also want to know your purpose. If Tili is in danger. Callow's expression conveyed the seriousness of that last part. Arya exchanged a look with Tala and Garen. Then she stepped forward, pressing a hand to her chest. We are no threat. Our ship destroyed. Storm. We come from Westeros. She pointed to herself, repeating Westeros, then at Tala. Lys. Garen said quietly, Stormlands, though he doubted any here would recognize the name. Arya cleared her throat. We seek, not war. We are travelers. She spread her hands, miming the flight of a bird, hoping to convey wandering or exploration. Callow translated with some difficulty, her brow furrowed. The woman named Arya listened, then spoke again. Other council members murmured among themselves. Callow struggled to keep up with the translation. Arya says Tili welcomes travelers, but many ships come from west coasts. They do not know Westeros. They do not know Lys. Arya wonders if you were part of Northmen who raided some islands. Callow frowned. Different language, sorry. But perhaps they had trouble with unknown sailors before. Arya swallowed. We are not raiders. We do not want to fight. She hoped her stance, hands open, would reinforce that message. She tapped her sword. I use this only to defend. Callow conveyed the sentiment, though not without stumbling over the words. Another council member leaned forward, arms crossed. He pointed at Arya's sword, then made a questioning gesture as if to ask what she had done with it. Arya hesitated, then gave a condensed account, miming the ocean waves, the wreck, the struggle in unknown lands. She tried to convey how they survived, how the crew was scattered, how Callow's people found them. The watchers nodded, some with sympathy, others with cautious eyes. Finally, Arya lifted her hand, silencing further discussion. She addressed Callow in a measured tone, a series of sentences that sounded carefully enunciated. Callow turned to Arya. Arya says the city will offer you safety, food, healing. You may stay, but you must learn our ways. Understand our laws. If you want to sail again, maybe to find your land, you must have permission from the Harbor Council. They rule the ships that come and go. Callow hesitated. Arya also says you should speak with Yaren, the cartographer who knows many routes. But she paused, chewing her lip as she tried to find the right phrasing. No known route leads to a place called Westeros. No chart shows Lys. She says if you still want to sail, it is a journey of unknown end. You see. Arya exhaled slowly. She expected as much. If no one here had heard of Westeros or Lys, it meant that crossing back might be impossible or at least uncharted. The best she could hope for was to earn the trust of Tili's leaders, gather resources, and attempt an expedition. Or, if that was doomed, maybe she would remain here, forging a new life in a city that was foreign yet fascinating. She glanced at Tala and Garen. Garen was trembling slightly, whether from illness or nerves she couldn't tell. Tala's dark eyes glistened with unspoken fear. But both of them nodded as if they had no other choice but to accept Arash's terms. Arya spoke softly. Thank you. We accept Tili's help. We will not cause trouble. And if there is a way to sail again, we will try. But for now, we learn. She met Callow's gaze, then looked to Arya. Yes. Callow translated, and Arya inclined her head, her expression calm but reserved. The other council members murmured approval. Karaith tapped his staff, announcing that he had more to say. In a lengthy monologue, he gestured at Garen's chest and Tala's ankle. Then he pointed at Arya's sword, nodding thoughtfully. At last, he fell silent. Callow turned to them. Karaith says you will stay in the healer's wing for as long as needed. He offers training or knowledge if you wish to help with collecting herbs, treating injuries, things like that. He says your sword skill might be good for defending caravans if you want to repay Tili. But all is your choice. Tilly does not force new people except that they must follow city law. Arya felt a surge of cautious gratitude. At least they had options. We understand. We will do our best. Tala and Garen echoed her, though more faintly. Arya made a final statement which Callow translated as "Council is finished. Go in peace." Then Sorin stepped forward, motioning for them to follow him out of the hall. They bowed as best they could, feeling the weight of a new life pressing upon them. The last thing Arya saw before leaving was Arya conferring with her fellow council members, casting sidelong glances at the strangers. Clearly, Tilly had welcomed them, but with watchful eyes. Sorin and Callow led them back through a maze of corridors until they reached a sunlit courtyard behind the council building. There, a small cluster of people waited, 3 young men and 2 women, each in modest Talayan garments. Sorin spoke quietly, and one of the women stepped forward, bowing politely to the newcomers. She had short, tightly braided hair and a bright smile that revealed a small gap in her front teeth. Sorin gestured between Arya's group and the 5 Talayans, saying something that sounded like an introduction. Callow explained, "These people, new friends. They speak your language a little or want to learn. They help you learn Tilly ways. Show city." Arya studied the group. One of the men looked older, perhaps mid-30s, with a missing ear scarred over. Another was barely out of boyhood, hardly older than a squire. All of them, though, wore the same open expressions: curiosity, a touch of excitement, as though meeting foreigners was a rare and thrilling event. The woman with the gap-toothed smile introduced herself as Irini. She tapped her chest and repeated, "Irini," then pointed to the older man, naming him as Jothi, then the younger man as Kimos, then the other 2, a broad-shouldered woman named Zell and a wiry, serious-faced fellow called Peroto. Each of them attempted a few common tongue words: "Hello," "Friend," "We show city." Their accents were thick, but Arya felt the sincerity behind their attempts. For the next week, life fell into a gentle pattern that was both alien and strangely comforting. Each morning, Tala and Garen received healing treatments from Korath and his acolytes: salves, herbal infusions, massages with aromatic oils that eased pain and loosened cramped muscles. Korath declared that Garen's cough came from silung, a congestion caused by too much salt water inhalation, but the herbal remedies and rest would cure him in time. Arya spent much of her day exploring the city with Irini and the others, or assisting in the storerooms of the healer's wing by carrying supplies or organizing dried leaves under Koratha's instructions. Despite the language barrier, she found she could pick up certain Talayan words: water, herb, bandage, good morning, thank you. In turn, Irini and Kimos begged her to teach them common tongue, scribbling notes on wooden tablets. It became a constant exchange, with many laughs at mispronunciations. Tala, once her ankle improved, joined Arya on walks through Tiluis' winding lanes. She gawked at the colorful murals, the throngs of merchants, the street musicians who played stringed instruments with haunting melodies. Garen, less mobile, often remained near the healer's wing, though he liked to sit in the courtyard garden where he could watch fountains trickle and breathe the perfumed air. The city was large enough that Arya and Tala discovered something new each day. Be it a market stall selling sweet fried pastries, a workshop shaping glass into delicate figurines, or an open-air amphitheater where performers danced in costumes made of feathers and shells, they learned that Tilly was ancient, founded on trade routes crossing the seas around Lenora. The people worshipped a pantheon of gods tied to water, wind, and celestial bodies. Temples dotted the terraces, each dedicated to a particular aspect: the wave goddess, the star keeper, the storm bringer. Irini tried to convey these beliefs to Arya, pointing at the sky or motioning like waves, though the finer points were lost in translation. Everywhere they went, onlookers paused to stare. Some recognized them as the strangers who'd arrived on Callow's ships. Children trailed after them, giggling when Tala stumbled over Talayan phrases. Now and then, a guard politely reminded them not to wander into restricted areas. Certain sections near the top of the terraces were off-limits without a special pass, presumably the domain of the council or high priests. On one occasion, Arya ventured too close to a tall gate guarded by soldiers in ornate lamellar armor. They crossed their spears to block her path. She backed off, reading the warning in their eyes. She had no desire to provoke them. Still, she found herself curious about Tilly's deeper secrets, what lay beyond those gates in that pearl-like edifice perched high on the ridge. During those peaceful days, she occasionally recalled the illusions she'd had about this journey. She had imagined discovering unpeopled lands or endless sea. Instead, she found herself in a bustling city that felt as alive and complex as King's Landing. With each passing dawn, her sense of wonder grew. Yet an undercurrent of restlessness also tugged at her. She was, in many ways, a guest here of an oddity. She owed Tilly her life, but she couldn't shake the question of whether she was meant to remain forever. What of Westeros? What of the vow she'd once taken, or the possibility that her siblings thought her dead? One afternoon, about 10 days into their stay, Arya and Kingsguard brought Arya to a large courtyard near Tilly's western gate. It had been arranged for Arya to see if her sword skills might be useful for city defense or caravan escort. The courtyard served as a training ground, complete with straw dummies and racks of weapons quite unlike what she was used to: curved blades, short thrusting spears, broad knives that resembled cleavers. A handful of Talayan soldiers sparred under the watchful eye of a tall, middle-aged officer named Rahivo, who wore an elaborately carved helmet topped with plumage. When Arya arrived, Rahivo looked her over, then gestured at the dummies with a slight grin. Clearly, he wanted to see what this foreigner could do. Arya unsheathed the needle. Its slender, familiar weight felt comforting in her hand. The soldiers drew back, examining the weapon with interest. It was smaller and thinner than their customary swords. Rahivo pointed to the nearest straw dummy. Arya took a breath, let muscle memory guide her, and delivered a rapid series of thrusts. The dummy's straw chest tore open. She pivoted, slashing at an imaginary opponent behind her, then spun the blade in a flourish. The soldiers let out low whistles of surprise. Arya bowed her head, stepping back from the battered dummy. She expected the same remarks she had received in Westeros, that she was too small, too delicate. Instead, she found only intrigued respect. Rahivo murmured something to his men, and a young soldier stepped forward with a curved training sword, clearly offering to spar. They circled each other. Arya recalled her sessions with Brienne, the fluid dance of steel in the Red Keep courtyard, the years of secret training in Bravos. This soldier was larger, more heavily muscled, used to a scimitar's sweeping strikes. Arya let him attack first, dancing aside with quick footwork. She parried, feeling the jolt of steel on steel. His blade hooked around for a follow-up slash, but she ducked beneath it, slipping behind him and tapping needle against his back. He froze in momentary shock. A ripple of laughter rose from the onlookers. The soldier grinned, acknowledging her speed. They reset positions. This time, he tried more cunning footwork, but Arya anticipated the angle, sidestepped, and thrust. He caught her blade on his guard, forced her back with a flurry of slashes. She gave ground carefully, then lunged in a feint, hooking needle around his blade to strike at his side. He managed a last-second parry, but he lost balance. Arya pressed forward and they tumbled in a swirl of dust. She ended up straddling him, needle's point near his throat, though she did not touch flesh. The soldier's breath came in short gasps. He raised his hand in surrender. Cheering and applause erupted from the onlookers. Even Rahivo, who had initially worn a testy expression, seemed impressed. He barked an order, and another soldier rushed up with a water skin, offering Arya a drink. She accepted, feeling her cheeks warm from exertion. Rahivo approached, clapped her on the shoulder, and said something that sounded distinctly approving. Kingsguard tried to translate. He says, "You are good. Swift like wind. We can use your skill. Maybe guard caravans or guard in city. He asks if you want to join, maybe." Arya felt a pang, remembering how she'd once served as a protector in Westeros. To fill that role again, this time in Tilly, was a strange notion, but it might give her a sense of purpose. She nodded tentatively, trying to convey that she'd consider it, though she didn't know how to say it clearly in Talayan. Kingsguard relayed the sentiment. Rahivo grinned, gesturing for her to follow him to the weapon racks, evidently eager to show her the variety of arms they used. Arya hung back, watching with a smile. Tala, who had come along as well, sat on a nearby bench, massaging her ankle. She caught Arya's eye and shrugged as if to say, "This is your domain, not mine." Garen wasn't present, though he was healing. He still tired easily and had chosen to remain in the gardens. Arya tried out a short spear, found its balance interesting, though she preferred the familiarity of Needle's grip. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia struck her. She used to spar daily in the Red Keep, listening to the clang of swords in the yard. Now, half a world away, she was demonstrating those same moves to strangers who had never even heard of the Seven Kingdoms. Rahivo indicated he wanted to see more. Arya obliged, hefting a curved blade from the rack, testing its weight. It was heavier than she liked, so she tried a shorter version with a narrower curve. A soldier stepped up for a friendly match. This time, Arya found herself adapting to the scimitar style, blocking wide arcs, slipping inside an overhead slash to jab with the blade's inner curve. She lacked the raw strength for heavy blows, so she relied on speed and precision. The soldier was skillful enough to keep her on her toes, but eventually she scored a light hit on his arm and he yielded. More cheers. The mood in the courtyard turned jovial. A few spectators teased the soldier for losing to the blade dancer from beyond the seas. Even though the words were in Chilean, Arya caught their meaning, especially with Kimos occasionally whispering translations in her ear. She managed a polite smile, though the compliment felt laced with the underlying realization that she would always be an outsider here. By the time the sun sank below the city walls, she'd sparred with 4 different Chilean warriors, each of whom gave her a respectful handshake or a light shoulder tap afterward, a gesture akin to "well done." Rehivo asked if she could return the next day for more training. With Kimos' help, she agreed. It felt good to sweat, to push her muscles, to prove that her skill could still have value in this strange place. Tala congratulated her on the matches, though she teased, "You look too happy slicing up straw men. You miss the thrill of danger, don't you?" Arya shrugged, unable to fully articulate the rush she felt whenever steel clashed, the sense that she was doing something that tied together her past and present. She might no longer wear the white cloak of the Kingsguard, but some part of her still longed to protect and to fight for a cause. That evening, as she and Tala made their way back to the healer's wing, the city's lanterns lit up the streets in soft gold. Chimes tinkled in the breeze, and the wide, star-strewn sky arched overhead. The 2 women paused at a small bridge spanning a narrow canal. Beneath them, water reflected the moon in broken shards. Tala turned to Arya, lips parted in thought. "We've been here nearly 2 weeks. It's beautiful, almost, if not for the dread that we might never see our homes again." She leaned on the low railing, wincing a bit from her tender ankle. "I was born in Liss, lived there until I was 9, then traveled with my mother across the narrow sea. For a while, I dreamed of returning, but ended up working on ships, never staying in one place. Now I'm further away than I ever imagined. It's like we're living in a dream turned inside out." Arya rested her arms on the railing. She understood the sentiment. "I keep thinking about my family, my siblings, what they must believe. Maybe they think I found what I was looking for at sea. Maybe they believe I'm dead. Part of me wonders if it would be better if they think I died honorably rather than lost in some far-off city." She shook her head, pushing away the gloom. "But we're alive. And Tili isn't unkind. That's more than we could have hoped for." Tala nodded. "Korath's treatments are helping Garen a lot. He's stronger every day. So maybe this is a second chance." She paused. "Do you want to stay?" Arya's gaze flicked to the water where ripples distorted the moon's reflection. "I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to keep going, to sail further west or try to find a route home. Another part sees these people, their city, their willingness to accept strangers and thinks, maybe I can do some good here. Help them with whatever dangers they face, like I did in Westeros." Her voice grew softer. "I never imagined I'd be the one needing a home, but perhaps that's what we are now, refugees in a land that never knew us." Tala let out a low exhale. "And do you think you can be content with that?" Arya forced a dry smile. "I don't know. I've never been content staying in one place for long. But I can't exactly walk away from Tili tomorrow. I owe them my life, and I owe you and Garen a chance to recover. Maybe in time, if we gain their trust, we can arrange an expedition to search for a sea route. Until then," she shrugged. "We do what we must." They continued across the bridge, each lost in private musings. The city's hum of nightlife drifted around them, murmured conversations from balconies, drifting music from a distant courtyard, the clop of donkey hooves on cobblestones. By the time they reached the healer's wing, Garen was already asleep in his cot, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Tala stretched out on her bed, and Arya made her way to the small adjoining room that had been set aside for her. She unbelted needle, setting it carefully at the bedside, and slipped out of her borrowed shoes. The night air through the open window was warm and fragrant, but her mind was restless. Memories of her father's face in the godwood of Winterfell shimmered in her thoughts. Would he have approved of her forging alliances here, so far from home? She believed so. He always valued compassion and cooperation above blind hostility. Yet she couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, a longing for the feel of the north's crisp wind, the sight of the weirwood's crimson leaves. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her. She drifted into uneasy dreams of walking through labyrinthine corridors, searching for a door that led back to Winterfell's courtyard, only to find each exit blocked by swirling designs and unknown faces. When she woke, dawn was just coloring the sky and the city's roosters crowed in distant yards. She rose, stretched, and prepared for another day in Tili. Over the following weeks, life fell into a pattern that both reassured and unsettled her. Garen grew healthier under Karatha's ministrations, able to walk without coughing fits. Tala regained near-full use of her ankle, though it remained stiff on cold mornings. Arya spent her mornings training with Rahivo's soldiers, teaching them some of her swift, agile style while learning their curved blade techniques in return. Evenings, she helped in the healer's wing or joined Irini and Chemos in the markets, learning new words and forging cautious friendships. Sometimes she glimpsed Callow or Soren in passing. Callow always grinned and asked a few questions in broken common tongue, eager to show Arya she was improving. Soren remained more formal, nodding with polite distance. The council kept a subtle watch on them, or so it seemed. Occasionally, Arisha or one of the other counselors would summon them for a brief talk, using Callow or Irini as interpreters, wanting to hear more of Westeros or Lys. Their curiosity was tempered by caution. How large were these foreign lands? How many people lived there? What kind of rulers held power? Arya tried to answer without revealing too many personal details. She didn't want to alarm them with tales of dragons or the White Walkers that once threatened the realm. She spoke mainly of the North's cold forests, King's Landing's busy harbor, the farmland of the Reach. Each time, the counselors listened intently, then conferred among themselves. Arya sensed that her every word might shape Tili's perception of her homeland. Meanwhile, local tensions occasionally surfaced. In her training sessions, Arya overheard rumors of unrest in the surrounding territory, bandits preying on caravans, or rival city-states in Lenora eyeing Tili's riches. Rahivo mentioned they might need skilled warriors to escort merchant routes that stretched inland and southward. Arya volunteered her sword more than once, eager to repay Tili's hospitality, though she also saw it as a chance to explore beyond the city walls. Rahivo assured her that, if the council approved, she would be welcome on an upcoming caravan guard detail. She waited for official permission, uncertain how Tili's bureaucracy functioned. One day, Karaith summoned her to a side chamber in the healer's wing. The old man's face was unreadable as he guided her inside, then motioned for her to sit on a low bench. He pointed to her sword, which she had leaned against the wall, and spoke in a soft voice. Irini, standing nearby, provided halting translation. Karaith says you carry much sorrow in your steel. He sees it in your eyes. He wonders if you dream of distant spirits. He also wonders if you have lost many in battles, that you carry their ghosts. Arya felt a chill. She remembered the House of Black and White, the training that made her a killer, the list of names she used to whisper every night. She recalled the War of the Five Kings, the death of her father, mother, Robb, the countless horrors she survived. Yes, she said simply. I've lost many, and I have taken many lives. She tapped the sword's hilt. But I do not kill for pleasure. I did it to protect myself or those who needed me. Karaith listened to Irini's translation, then spoke gently. Irini relayed, he does not judge you. He knows warriors carry burdens. He invites you to take part in a cleansing rite. In Tili, those who have taken lives sometimes undergo a spiritual washing to free them of the past's shadows. Karaith says it might bring you peace. Arya hesitated. She had never placed much faith in religious rituals outside the old gods of the North. The many-faced god had taught her about death, not about cleansing guilt. Yet a small part of her felt drawn to the idea of a formal, symbolic act that might ease the weight in her heart. She gave a slow nod. I'm not from your land, but if it brings peace, I'll try. So it was that on the next full moon, Karaith led Arya to one of Tili's lesser temples, perched on a quiet terrace overlooking the sea. Tala and Garen stayed behind, each occupied with their own tasks, though they offered moral support. A single priestess in flowing white robes greeted Arya, beckoning her into a stone courtyard lit by moonlight. The walls bore carvings of waves and spirals, and a circular pool at the center shimmered silver under the sky. Karaith stood by the pool's edge, staff in hand. He spoke a few words to the priestess, who nodded. Then he motioned for Arya to remove her shoes and step into the shallow water. She did so, the water's temperature surprising her. It was neither cold nor warm, but had a strange softness to it. The priestess approached, chanting quietly in Talayan. She sprinkled a handful of powdered herbs onto the water, releasing a gentle fragrance. Arya inhaled, feeling an odd calm settle over her. Karaith signaled for her to close her eyes. She obeyed. The priestess began to speak, her tone low and rhythmic, as if reciting a litany to a deity of the waves. The language was incomprehensible, yet the cadence had a soothing quality. Karaith, standing at the edge, tapped his staff lightly on the stones, in time with the priestess's chant. Arya let her mind drift. Faces swam up from memory. Her father, stern and kind. Her mother, worried in every glance. Robb, valiant and doomed. The Hound, fierce and broken. Even Jaqen Hagar with his cryptic smile. She remembered the anger that once fueled her. The kill list she recited in the dark. Pain and vengeance had shaped her youth. Was it truly behind her now? She felt tears slip down her cheeks, but she let them fall, the water lapping at her ankles as if to carry them away. The priestess moved closer, laid a gentle hand on Arya's brow, and dipped a small vessel into the pool. She poured water over Arya's head in a careful, symbolic motion. Moonlit droplets cascaded, soaking Arya's hair, trickling down her neck. The priestess chanted more intensely, as though inviting the spirits of the sea to wash away regret. Arya's breath caught. She imagined the vast ocean that had nearly claimed her, the countless journeys she'd made by water, across the narrow sea to Bravos, across the sunset sea to these unknown lands. Was water her destiny, an element that both freed and nearly destroyed her? A part of her yearned for a sign that she could lay down her old life. Another part whispered that she would always be the girl forged by that pain. Slowly, the chanting subsided. The priestess withdrew her hand. Korath tapped his staff a final time, then murmured something that sounded like a benediction. Arya opened her eyes. The temple courtyard glowed under the moon, each carved wave on the walls seeming to ripple with reflected light. She realized she was breathing more steadily, as if a knot had loosened in her chest. The sorrow was not gone. She doubted any ritual could erase it, but she felt a small sense of grace, a permission to move forward without so much guilt pressing on her shoulders. She turned to Korath, managed a bow. He smiled gently, nodded. The priestess stepped back, expression serene. That night, she left the temple with water still dripping from her hair. Korath parted ways with her outside, heading to his own quarters. Arya walked alone through the moonlit streets, wearing a hush in her heart. She thought of how, once upon a time, she had been no one, a faceless assassin. Then she became Arya Stark again, then a knight in the Kingsguard, then a wanderer, then a castaway. Perhaps in Teali, she was something new yet again. The city's narrow lanes carried her back to the Healer's Wing, where Tala and Garen slept. She slipped into her small chamber, set needle aside, and gazed out the window at the star-filled sky. For the first time in months, she felt a hint of peace. Maybe she couldn't truly bury her past, but she could let it rest for a while, letting these new experiences define her present. The next morning, she rose early to meet Rahivo for training. The courtyard where she practiced was alive with murmurs of excitement. Soldiers bustled about, loading saddlebags, checking their gear. Rahivo greeted Arya with a brisk nod, then explained, through the partial help of Chemos, that they were assembling a caravan escort to head north. Word had come of bandits harrying traders on the roads leading to a city-state called Matar. The Teali Council wanted to secure the route before it escalated into open conflict. Rahivo extended an invitation for Arya to join them. She would ride with a contingent of Teali's best warriors, protecting merchants who were bringing textiles and spices for trade. It could be dangerous. The bandits might be well armed, but it was also a clear chance to prove her worth and see more of Lenora's lands beyond Teali. Arya's heartbeat quickened. She asked for a moment to speak with Tala and Garen. Rahivo, all business, signaled that they would depart in 2 days, so she had to decide soon. Arya found Tala in the Healer's Wing storerooms helping Koratha's acolytes. Garen sat close by, wrapping dried herbs in paper bundles. They both looked up when Arya relayed the news. A caravan? That's risky, Garen said, brow furrowing. But it's also an opportunity. Tala cradled a jar of ointment. An opportunity for you, maybe. My ankle is better, but I'm not sure about trudging through bandit-infested roads. And Garen has just gotten back to full strength. Arya nodded, gazing at them both. I don't want to leave you two here unprotected, but Rahivo's men are capable. Teali itself is safe enough, and if anything goes wrong, Korath and the city guard will keep watch. This might be my best chance to earn respect from the council and gather knowledge about the region. If we ever want to find a route home or mount an expedition, we need allies. Garen exchanged a glance with Tala. You've always been the fighter, he said softly. And to be honest, I think you've been restless here, itching for a purpose. Maybe this is it. Tala set the jar down. Just promise you won't get yourself killed in some foreign skirmish. We've come too far to lose you now. Arya allowed a small, wry grin. I promise I'll try to avoid that. She squeezed Tala's hand. I'll send word whenever I can. Hopefully, the road is well traveled. Rahivo says we'll be accompanied by couriers who can relay messages back to Tili. Maybe I can even find out more about these other city-states, see if any has knowledge of the Western Seas. They embraced briefly, the bond forged by their harrowing time as castaways, lending the moment a quiet warmth. Garen offered his hand in a firm clasp. Good luck, Arya. We'll be here, continuing to learn Talayan ways and assisting Korath. If anything changes, we'll let you know. 2 days later, at dawn, Arya stood at Tili's northern gate with a small caravan of 20 merchants, 8 pack animals carrying goods, and a squad of 15 warriors led by Rahivo. She wore a Talayan outfit suited to travel. Loose trousers of sturdy cloth, a belted tunic in earthy colors, and boots she had bargained for in the market. A half size too big, but comfortable enough after she padded them with cloth. Over her shoulder, she carried a small pack with essentials. Dried fruit, water, bandages, flint for fire. Needle hung at her hip, newly sharpened, while Rahivo had also loaned her a short spear in the Talayan style. The morning air was crisp, a faint haze drifting over the city rooftops. Merchants fiddled with the harnesses of the pack animals. Short, woolly creatures somewhere between a llama and a donkey, while the warriors checked their curved swords and bows. Rahivo spoke to her in broken common tongue, something about long path, trouble near canyon, then patted her on the back in a comradely fashion. She nodded, scanning the small crowd for a final glimpse of Tala or Garen. She saw Tala at a distance, standing by a vine-covered archway, waving goodbye. Arya raised her hand in return, feeling a sudden pang. Then the caravan began to move. The gates swung open, revealing a dirt road lined with lush farmland. Talayan farmers, already at work in the fields, paused to watch the procession pass. Beyond the farmland, the land rose into foothills clad in thick vegetation that Arya recognized from her time stranded. Scrub and twisted trees, though here it was dotted with cultivated terraces. The sense of venturing into the unknown prickled her skin, reminiscent of all her journeys before. From King's Landing to Harrenhal, from the Riverlands to Bravos, from Westeros to these distant shores. They traveled at a modest pace, mindful of the loaded pack beasts. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Arya rode alongside 2 Talayan warriors named Izuno and Bayet, both friendly enough, though limited in common tongue. They managed to trade a few jokes, mostly with gestures. Now and then, they'd stop to let the merchants check the cargo or water the animals. The farmland gave way to wilder terrain, rolling hills crisscrossed by small rivers. Arya spotted an odd goat-like creature, similar to those she'd hunted after the shipwreck, scurrying up the rocky slope. Birds with brightly colored plumage flitted overhead. The road was a well-worn track, wide enough for 2 wagons abreast, though they had no wagons. Talayan caravans favored pack beasts for these routes. By midday, they reached a small village perched on a hill. Mudbrick houses clustered around a central well. Children ran out to greet the caravan, calling out words of welcome. Rahivo's warriors distributed small tokens, copper rings or beads, to the villagers, a customary gesture Arya guessed was meant to maintain goodwill. An elder wearing a beaded necklace chatted with Rahivo for a few minutes, presumably discussing any bandit sightings. Arya tried to read their body language. The elder looked worried, pointing north with a furrowed brow. Rahivo's expression stiffened and he thanked the elder with a short bow. The caravan pressed on. Mounting tension seeped into the ranks. The warriors grew more vigilant, scanning the ridgelines and valleys. Conversation among them was subdued. Merchants, too, checked their supplies of arrows kept for self-defense. Arya felt her heart rate quicken, the old battle readiness creeping in. She'd faced worse than bandits, but that didn't mean she took them lightly. She asked Izuno, "Danger near?" in broken Talayan. Izuno grunted, tapping the hilt of his sword as if to say, "We're prepared." They continued until late afternoon, when the land rose into a maze of rocky outcrops and shallow ravines. The sun cast long shadows across the road and the caravan slowed, picking its way carefully around boulders. Rahivo signaled a halt, gathering his warriors at a vantage point where the road wound between high cliffs. He spoke in swift Talayan, pointing at the caravan and gesturing to 2 squads, each to move on a different side of the pass. Arya gathered that they intended to traverse this choke point as safely as possible, likely anticipating an ambush. She volunteered to accompany one flank. Rehivo nodded, trusting her skill. Under the dimming sky, they advanced. The pass was narrow, the cliffs rising steeply on either side. The pack beasts brayed nervously, sensing the tension. Arya's gaze darted over every ledge and shadow, half expecting a volley of arrows. As the caravan edged around a bend, she heard a sudden shout from above. Then the twang of bowstrings. Arrows whistled down, striking the stony ground with sharp cracks. One arrow lodged in a merchant's pack, narrowly missing the man's shoulder. The Talayan warriors yelled, raising shields or diving for cover behind rocks. Arya crouched, rolling aside, her heart hammering. More arrows fell, clattering off the stone. She glanced up and saw silhouettes on a high ledge, bandits, as expected. Rehivo bellowed an order. Talayan archers in the caravan fired back. A chaotic exchange erupted. Arya found partial shelter behind a jutting boulder, scanning for a path to climb the cliffs. The pass was too narrow for a direct charge up the slope, so the best bet was to return fire or move around the flank. She saw Izuno loosing arrows from behind a rock while Bayat shielded a cowering merchant. Arrows whizzed overhead, their fletchings a blur. A soldier cried out, clutching his leg where an arrow protruded. Another arrow thudded into a pack beast, sending it reeling with a panicked bray. The road devolved into bedlam. Arya clenched her teeth, unaccustomed to a purely ranged fight. Needle wouldn't help much here. She decided to circle around. Waving at Bayat, she pointed to a less steep section of cliff to the west. He nodded, covering her with arrow fire. Keeping low, Arya sprinted behind an outcrop. A volley of arrows rained down, but none struck her. She found a narrow crevice that angled up the slope, half-choked with loose scree. Carefully, she ascended, each footstep sending pebbles skittering. The bandits were focused on the caravan below, peppering it with arrows. She crept closer, hearing their shouts, some language that might have shared roots with Talayan, but she couldn't decipher it. At last, she reached a ledge near the top. She glimpsed 3 bandits crouched behind a rock. They wore ragged leathers, faces partly covered by cloth. One drew an arrow from a quiver, took aim at the caravan. Another rummaged through a small satchel, perhaps retrieving more arrowheads. Arya noticed that they had minimal armor, just scraps of boiled leather. If she could take them by surprise, she might disrupt their vantage. She drew Needle quietly, lowering her stance. Her heart pounded. She remembered the wolf within her, the days of silent kills. Yet these bandits were not Lannister men at Harrenhal, nor were they the undead. They were men driven by desperation or greed. Still, they threatened her companions. She slid closer, each step measured. The rocky terrain provided cover, but also threatened noise. At just the right moment, she lunged around the boulder. Before they could react, she drove Needle through the nearest bandit's shoulder, eliciting a cry of pain. The second bandit whirled, dropping his bow, reaching for a knife. Arya sidestepped, parrying the blade with Needle's slender steel. The third bandit let out a startled shout, fumbling for an arrow. She kicked the second bandit's leg out from under him, ignoring his curse, then pivoted to slash at the archer's bowstring, severing it. The archer cursed in that unknown tongue, swinging the broken bow at her. Arya ducked, ramming her shoulder into his chest, toppling him to the ground. She pressed Needle to his throat, breath ragged. Below, the sounds of battle echoed. More Talayan archers had fired upward, and the bandits seemed to be in retreat. The one Arya had stabbed in the shoulder tried to crawl away, but she kicked his bow aside. The second bandit rose to his knees, dagger in hand, eyes wide with fury. She slashed with Needle, forcing him back. He stumbled, lost footing on loose rocks, and plummeted off the ledge with a scream, slamming into the ravine below. Arya flinched at the sickening thud. The archer beneath her blade panted, face contorted in fear or hatred. She felt that old stirring of a killer's instinct. In the past, she would have ended him without hesitation. But the memory of the cleansing ritual at the temple flashed in her mind. She hesitated. A shout from behind startled her. Another Talayan soldier had climbed the ledge. He rushed forward, sword raised to finish the pinned bandit. Arya snapped, "Wait," in common tongue, but he didn't understand. The soldier plunged his blade downward, merciless. The bandit let out a choked groan, then went still. Arya swallowed hard, stepping back. She couldn't save every life in a battle. The soldier panted, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. He nodded at Arya, as if to say good job. She nodded mutely, scanning the area. The bandits on the ledges were scattering, climbing back over the ridges or fleeing down the other side. A few kept firing arrows in desperation, but the main assault seemed to falter. Rehivo's voice rose from below, ordering a charge forward. The caravan advanced, despite injuries. Arrows still whined past, but the Talayan archers responded with deadly accuracy, picking off those who exposed themselves. Within minutes, the bandits fully broke, retreating into the crags. Arya climbed down carefully, meeting up with Rahivo near the road. A wounded merchant groaned, an arrow in his shoulder, but he was alive. One Talayan warrior lay unmoving near a pack beast that had also fallen. Another soldier knelt by him, expression grim. Arya approached, recognized that the warrior was beyond saving, a fatal arrow had pierced his throat. The soldier looked up at her, tears in his eyes. She touched his shoulder in silent condolence, her throat tight. Even if she didn't know this man, he had fought by her side. It stung to see him lost so quickly. Rahivo surveyed the damage, then looked to Arya. Their eyes met. He exhaled, nodding in gratitude as though acknowledging her part in driving off the ambush. She felt no triumph, only the familiar hollowness that followed violence. But she also recognized the necessity. They had saved the caravan from a worse fate. Some might have died regardless, but more would have died without the armed escort. They spent the next hour tending the wounded, gathering arrows, and salvaging supplies. One pack beast was badly injured, so they put it down to spare its suffering. The bandits had vanished, leaving behind a handful of bodies. Rahivo refused to pursue into the rugged hills, focusing instead on continuing the journey. After the confusion settled, they pressed on until dusk, finding a defensible campsite under a rocky overhang. There, they built a small fire, posted sentries, and tried to rest. Arya's arms ached, and she noticed dried blood on her tunic. She wiped needle clean, her motions mechanical. Around her, merchants cooked a meager stew, soldiers whispered among themselves, and the wounded moaned softly. Izuno approached with a clay cup of water, handing it to her. She mumbled thanks and halting Talayan. He squeezed her shoulder, offering a weak smile of camaraderie. Night fell cold and somber. Arya pulled her cloak tight, settling near the fire. She thought of how, back in King's Landing, she had spent evenings after a skirmish reflecting on the dead. Now she did the same, only in a foreign land under strange stars with foreign allies. War, battle, and death, they seemed to follow her no matter how far she traveled. Yet she told herself this fight had been for a good cause, to protect the innocent. It was the same creed she'd once upheld as a Kingsguard. If she was fated to walk this path, at least it served a purpose. The caravan awoke the next morning to discover no further bandit attacks, though tension remained high. They pressed on, crossing hills and fording shallow rivers. The landscape gradually shifted to drier scrubland dotted with rocky plateaus. At scattered intervals, they saw evidence of old ruins, crumbled walls, or carved stones half buried in dust. Izuno explained something in Talayan that she couldn't fully grasp, but she caught the words old kings and ancient war. Perhaps these were the remains of some earlier civilization. She felt an odd echo of home, recalling the ruins of Harrenhal or the old towers of the north. Even here, people lived and died, built and fell, leaving behind silent stones. By the time they neared their destination, an outpost settlement that connected Tili's territory to Matar's roads, they had weathered 2 more skirmishes. Neither was as fierce as the ambush in the past, but each reminded Arya how fragile life on these trade routes could be. She fought with skill and discipline, earning the admiration of Rahivo's warriors. They began calling her Arya Swiftblade in Talayan, a nickname she gleaned from the repeated words that accompanied friendly claps on the back. Yet she felt the weight of each confrontation, aware that her kills added to a body count she couldn't forget. The cleansing ritual had given her a measure of peace, but it hadn't absolved her of the inevitable cost of defending others. Finally, late on the 7th day out from Tili, they arrived at the border outpost. It was a fortified compound of stone and timber surrounded by a tall palisade. Beyond it lay a wide, dusty road that stretched northward toward Matar. The caravan was greeted by outpost guards who recognized Rahivo's banner and opened the gate. Inside, low buildings housed soldiers, stable pens, and storehouses for trade goods. A well in the center provided water. Everything carried a functional, military air reminiscent of the Night's Watch forts Arya had seen near the wall, places devoted to vigilance and survival rather than comfort. Rahivo led them to meet the outpost commander, a grizzled woman with braided silver hair named Savanya. She nodded at their story of bandits, remarking that raiders had grown bolder in recent months. Arya listened as best she could, piecing together that a local warlord might be funding these raids, though no one seemed certain. Savanya invited them to stay a few days, rest, and help fortify the area before continuing to Matar or returning to Tili. Rahivo agreed, wanting to ensure the roads were safer for future caravans. In the outpost's dusty courtyard, the merchants began trading some of their spices and cloth with Savannah's soldiers, exchanging goods for fresh provisions and perhaps a small profit. Arya, restless, volunteered to patrol with a few of Rahivo's men. In a short time, she found herself riding a borrowed donkey-horse hybrid, trotting along the outpost's perimeter under the blazing sun, scanning the horizons for any sign of trouble. It was monotonous yet oddly reassuring. Her senses remained keen, as in the north, where one never knew if an enemy lurked in the snow-covered pines. During one such patrol, she noticed a range of mountains to the northwest, hazy with distance. She asked a soldier named Yansa about them, pointing. Yansa replied with an uncertain shrug, referencing Mutar, older realms, unknown lands. Arya wondered if, beyond those peaks, there might lie a coastline leading back to Westeros or some new territory altogether. The scope of Lenora overwhelmed her. Teely was only one city-state among many. If she were to search for a route back home, she might have to traverse countless leagues, forging alliances with people who spoke new languages and worshipped new gods. The enormity of that challenge nearly stole her breath. A few days later, with the bandit threat somewhat quelled, Rahivo decided it was time to return to Teely. The merchants who still had goods to trade pressed on to Matar, accompanied by a small escort provided by Savannah. Arya had the option to continue with them, but Rahivo strongly recommended returning, having seen that she was still a guest in Teely and might need the council's permission for longer journeys. Arya reluctantly agreed, aware she didn't want to vanish further into unknown lands without a plan. So she joined Rahivo and the bulk of his warriors in heading south, retracing their route but with fewer delays. They encountered no more bandits. Apparently word had spread that a formidable guard patrolled these roads. At last, they crested a familiar ridge one late afternoon and saw Teely's towers glimmering in the distance. The sun bathed the terraces in molten gold, the harbor beyond shimmering like a polished mirror. Arya felt a strange pang of relief at the sight. She realized she had grown to think of Teely as a refuge, if not yet a home. The city's walls promised comfort, healing, and the friendly faces she had left behind. They passed through the gates at dusk, welcomed by watchmen who recognized Rahivo. Word spread quickly of their return. Children darted forward, calling to the warriors by name, asking about their triumphs. The color and bustle of the streets enveloped Arya, a stark contrast to the dust and tension of the open road. She accompanied Rahivo to the same courtyard where they had parted a week before. There, Soren greeted them, exchanging a warrior's handshake with Rahivo, then turning to Arya with a respectful nod. Callow appeared, beaming with relief. "You safe?" she said, her accent still thick but more confident than before. "Good. Tala, Garen, wait you." Arya thanked her, grinning at the prospect of seeing her companions. Before she could leave, Rahivo approached, producing a small token from his pouch, a medallion carved with a swirl pattern. He pressed it into her hand, gesturing for Callow to translate. Callow's eyes lit up. "Rahivo says you have proven your loyalty in battle. This is a token of Teely's warriors. You are a friend, comrade. With this, you can train in the city guard or accompany caravans without question." Arya looked at the medallion, feeling an unexpected flush of pride. She glanced up at Rahivo. "Thank you," she said, placing her fist over her heart in the gesture she'd seen them use. Rahivo nodded, his eyes crinkling in a hint of a smile. It was strange how quickly she had gone from castaway to recognized fighter among these people, but she wouldn't reject the sense of belonging it offered. She took her leave, following Callow through the winding streets to the healer's wing. Moonlight spangled the towers and arches. The sense of cooking fires and perfumed incense mingled in the breeze. A hush of gratitude washed over Arya. She lived, still forging her path in this land. Perhaps the Seven or the old gods watched over her. Or maybe it was just chance and her own stubborn will. Either way, she was here now, carrying a swirl-carved medallion that proved she had a place in Teely's story, however temporary or permanent it might be. Tala and Garen greeted her with embraces in the quiet courtyard of the healer's wing. Their eyes shone with relief and joy. Over a simple meal of steamed vegetables and spiced fish, she recounted the battles on the road, the bandits' ambush, and the outpost's stark beauty. Garen shook his head in awe. "You've become part of Teely's defense, it seems. Are you sure you aren't a soldier at heart?" Arya shrugged. "Maybe I am. I was once sworn to protect in Westeros too. It feels right in some ways." She stroked the medallion. "They gave me this. A sign I'm accepted." Tala raised her cup in a makeshift toast. "Then let's drink to acceptance in a place we never imagined we'd call our own." They clinked cups, letting the warm rush of fermented fruit wash down their throats. Outside, the temple bells chimed a soft nocturne, marking another day's passage in Teely. And so, Arya Stark, once a Kingsguard knight, once a faceless assassin, once a wolf of Winterfell, found herself at an unexpected crossroads. She had discovered a cause to fight for, people who valued her blade and her spirit. Yet the question still lingered, would she remain here, forging a new existence in Lenora, or would she one day gather the resolve and resources to cross the wild seas in search of Westeros again? For now, though, she set aside that decision. Life in Teele was no longer just survival, it was living, learning, and contributing to a city that welcomed her. As she drifted off to sleep that night, safe within the cool walls of the Healer's Wing, she found herself strangely content. The sea might have carried her to lands beyond any map, but it had not drowned her. She was Arya Stark, forging a fresh legend in a realm that had never heard her name before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horizons, and she would face them with Needle at her side, memory in her heart, and the spirit of the North guiding her feet, even here, in the warm glow of Teele's moonlit towers.